There were two men standing in the ring. One was significantly larger, had a tattoo on his arm, and long hair. Standing in front of him was a smaller guy. The larger man's name was Daniel Kochi, nicknamed the Destroyer, and his opponent's name was Kwon Yong-min. Eye contact was established between them. The referee, who was standing to the side, had already started the fight, and the look between the two men became more fierce and intense. It was time for the fight, so the referee frantically shouted for the fight to begin in the ring, and his cries spread in all directions. Daniel immediately rushed towards his opponent, clenching his large fist, his eyes burning like an angry bull. When the smaller Yeon-min dodged his massive hand, the big guy was visibly confused, and the guy dodged the blow nicely. Before Daniel could recover from his opponent's evasion, he received an unexpectedly powerful blow to the face and cursed loudly. The boy had a good physique, and his muscles stood out as he jumped. Yeon-min delivered his kick. The stocky opponent flew to the floor of the ring with a broken face at considerable speed because the guy's blow was very powerful. The guy landed on the floor and, spreading his arms, prepared for the next attack and looked in the direction where his opponent had fallen. While Yeon-min waited for Daniel to continue or react, praise for his skill rang out from all sides because he had ended the fight in 2 seconds. Unfortunately, Daniel was unable to win and get the title because he was knocked to the floor by a guy who was much smaller than him. The guy rubbed his neck awkwardly with his hand, while next to him someone shouted joyfully and excitedly into the microphone. Amidst the cheers, the referee raised Yeon-min's hand and, as his name was shouted, declared him the winner of today's title match. After the match, people with cameras approached the guy, including a good-looking journalist who asked him for an interview. He told her that he was very happy to have won and that today was his day, but then unexpectedly announced that he was retiring. The television was in an uproar over the young man's statement, and the news broadcast his unexpected decision to leave the sport. Lying on the floor, Yeon-min watched TV and ate the contents of the package, surrounded by a soft sofa, pillows, and the comfort of home. He rested. He didn't really care because everyone would forget about him in a couple of weeks. Lazily popping a snack into his mouth, he decided that he was tired of fighting. The fights had really exhausted him, but even though he was already at home, he was bored and lazily rolled from side to side. His idol was interrupted by a girl with long pink hair who frantically hit Yeon-min on the back, causing the poor guy's eyes to turn white. It hurt so much that the boy grimaced in pain and asked her why she did it. As it turned out, the girl did it so that he wouldn't be so bored and asked him to go for a walk and look for friends. Yeon-min was annoyed by the request to find friends and snapped that he had friends and didn't need to do that. The girl sighed sadly because she thought the guy was lying to her, but she still asked him to at least go to the gym and meet someone. Yeon replied that he was retired and too old to go and play sports. The girl was angry at this response and expressed her dissatisfaction that at 24 years old, he was already retired and proud of it. The guy didn't think it was bad and, striking a pose with a beaming face, said that he had defeated everyone he could and he could be proud of that. After that, he flopped down on the sofa and assured the girl that he never needed friends and would just sit there and relax. The girl was not reassured and asked why he was going to take a break from such a lifestyle, as he could become lazy and gain weight. For Yeon-min, this was not a problem. He turned this warning into a joke because, even with extra weight, he would still be handsome. He finally showed his attitude to all this by flopping down on the sofa, putting his feet up, and saying that he didn't care. The girl decided to change the subject and, picking up the remote, suggested that the guy might be interested in a game that was very popular at the moment. The TV screen showed a picturesque intro to the final saga, depicting handsome warriors with weapons and armor. Two men were sitting on the set, obviously live, and the host was asking the guest questions. The host, with his extravagant appearance, talked about the increased ratings of their game. The man was interested in whether Yeon-min would be a competitor if he joined the game, because the guest also had impressive strength indicators. The guy believed that Yeon's name did not matter because there were many champions in the game who did not know how to control their characters and were just showing off their names. He added that even if Yeon knows how to control his character, he probably doesn't understand the essence of the game, so he is not a rival. This shocked the host, and he asked if the situation would be the same if Min had a fully upgraded character. The guy smiled playfully and said that he is a master at this game, while Min is a master at real fights, so his chances are 0. Yeon-min listened to all this and clearly did not like such comments about himself. Excitement and the desire to prove the opposite took over, so Min told the girl that he would try the game, which made her very happy. The girl was so happy that he agreed to try playing that she jumped on the guy and hugged him. While the guy asked if he had to be a ranker, the girl danced frantically with joy. Later, Min saw on the forums how people were heatedly and actively discussing who could be stronger in the games and what would happen if he won. Subsequently, passers-by on the city streets actively turned around and were surprised by what they saw. Something very surprised them. Yang Min was walking down the sidewalk, and people who recognized him were quite surprised to see him in broad daylight. He did not lose control of himself, but he could clearly hear how people from all sides wanted to get his number, get to know him, or approach him. He probably didn't care, but if anyone thought he couldn't hear anything, his ears were as sensitive as an echolocator. He was so pleased with the attention, it meant a lot to him, and he thought he was still popular. When the guy entered the building, the girls at the reception desk greeted him cheerfully. There was also a large crowd of people here, and they were also frantically happy to see him or recognized him. A girl with red hair approached the guy and asked if she could help him with anything. It turned out that the guy was curious about what he had to do to start playing, so he asked for help. This shocked the girl, and she voiced her surprise and asked if he was sure of his decision. Minu didn't like the stranger's reaction very much and immediately turned to leave, but the girl caught up with him and apologized. She shyly suggested that he come to a quest room nearby and pointed him in the right direction. Yeonmin went to the designated place that the girl had told him to go for scanning, undressed, and began scanning. The girls asked him not to move for 10 seconds and looked at the monitors to check his characteristics. When the results were ready, the girl was terrified and surprised by what she saw on the monitor. The screen displayed bright tables and messages proving that Yeonmin had maximum strength, endurance, and agility characteristics. While the girls behind the booth were frantically surprised and screaming, the guy smiled proudly, pleased with the news. Later, the events moved to a tall building with dozens of blue windows, which was the headquarters of the final saga. Inside the office, most of the employees gathered in a corner near a computer, looking very shocked. The men were shocked by the number of trophies Yeonmin had won, and by the fact that he wanted to start the game at all. The guy asked the woman who was the head what to do in this situation, as masters of sports usually have many awards that give bonuses. She looked serious and somewhat angry and replied that they would do as planned. The excited guy clarified to the manager that Yeon had many victories in world tournaments, which gave him a lot of points because he had 500 victories. The woman leaned closer to the monitor, looking more closely at what was displayed there. She couldn't believe what was happening. A satisfied yawn sounded in the apartment. Lazy Yeonmin, who had lost track of time, stretched out on the sofa. When he got up from the sofa and looked around the empty room, he noticed that the noisy girl next to him was not there. A bright blue light shone from the slightly open door of the dark room, catching the young man's attention. When he approached and turned on the light, he saw a gaming capsule with a helmet in front of him and wondered if he should try it. In a moment, he changed into different clothes and, already holding the helmet in his hands, decided to try using this device. The capsule opened, and the guy began to position himself inside it, following the sequence. First the helmet, then the button. When he was inside and the helmet was already on his head, something clicked suspiciously, and the guy got scared. He had already moved into another reality and was falling deep down into a dark space. A voice from nowhere greeted him, and a large translucent screen appeared in front of the boy. The final saga game splash screen appeared, hinting that he was about to start the game. When the system reacted to his presence, the boy began to receive dozens of messages from it, which made Min nervous. He was then asked to choose a name to use in the game, and the boy paused to think. He chose the name Ray, and immediately his game version appeared in front of him in a nice suit. Now the system offered Ray to go through game training, to which the young man willingly agreed, so the guy immediately moved on to training. On the monitor screen, people from the office watched as Ray skillfully dodged the shots of an aggressive character. There were no fewer people now than at the beginning, but their surprise knew no bounds. What they saw was incredible. The robot-like character had sharp, asymmetrical features and shot bullets directly from his palm. Judging by the expression on our main character's face, this training excited him, and he had a smile on his face. Despite the fact that the robot was firing dozens of bullets in his direction, Ray was already almost upon him. When the distance was reduced several more times, even the robot was visibly frightened by such an approach. The final step to defeat the character was Ray's powerful punch, which formed a ring. Our protagonist's actions were astonishing to the office workers, their eyes wide with shock. One of the employees told the girl with glasses that it looked like Ray was cheating, but the woman said that the system had reported fair play. The man did not immediately believe that this was a real person because, in his opinion, a living person could not move so fast. He completed the game in 10 steps. The woman added that the system itself determines a person's movements based on their physical data, so in theory, such a phenomenon is possible. Meanwhile, our main character had already changed opponents, and a large ogre was swinging an axe at him. The guy not only skillfully dodged the blow, but also kicked the axe handle, which even surprised the creature. He continued his upward kick and jumped over the monster's head. The jump was followed by a powerful blow straight to the green creature's helmet, causing its eyes to light up. The blow was so powerful that the creature immediately collapsed to the floor, watched from above by the victorious Ray. He descended to the floor to rest from training, and semi-transparent blue pixels rose above his opponent's body. The boy's impressions were moderate because, In his opinion, the training was not bad, but the opponent was weak. Time passed, and the boy trained with a Japanese samurai-like figure who had a sword that Ray broke. Then there was a bear that even looked cute, but that didn't stop the guy from delivering a somewhat indecent and unfair blow. After the fluffy creature, Ray fought a jelly-like creature, which received numerous blows with one hand. The blue creature couldn't withstand such blows, and by the end of the battle looked like a sad puddle. When the guy finished fighting, the system announced that the hidden skill Pole Vault had been unlocked. The boy was not pleased with the unlocked skill, noticing that he was tired and not sure if this was a real game. While Ray was playing in one of the city's cafes, a girl couldn't believe her ears when she found out that the boy had a sister. The girl was sitting with her friend and telling her that her brother had started playing, to which her friend reacted enthusiastically and looked happy. It was unexpected for her friend that Yeon Min had retired, and now it turned out that he was playing games, which was impossible for her. The girl replied to her friend that everything would be fine with Min because she knew that he always succeeded. The brunette noticed that Min's sister seemed worried and asked what was wrong. Her friend replied, looking away with her big eyes, that her brother had always been omnipotent. She remembered how Yeon Min complained that he could never realize his full potential. For the boy, this world was too small and weak, so he was frankly bored here. As his sister, the girl was overly concerned about his condition and always accompanied him with an anxious look. Meanwhile, while the girls were talking, our main character reached the 30th level, where he had to fight his doppelganger. At first glance, even if you looked closely, it was not entirely clear where our hero stood. The two were so similar that it was difficult to tell which one was the real guy. The game was gaining momentum, and the guy was getting more and more interested in playing, so he rubbed his fists eagerly. His doppelganger was quite aggressive, but even he did not expect such agility from the real player. The guy clearly and accurately hit his double with red stripes on his suit right in the groin. The poor doppelganger doubled over in pain and grabbed his groin, trying to calm the unpleasant sensations. Then the copy fell to the ground, curled up in a ball, trembling, and began to slowly disappear, covered in pixels. The system sent a bunch of messages again, but in the end, he was offered to choose between self-improvement and cultivation. There was no description of these options, so the guy was a little confused because now he didn't know for sure what to choose. In an instant, the system opened two screens in front of him with explanations of each option. The method of self-improvement involved incredible concentration paired with maximally developed physical skills. The cultivation method involved filling his muscles with mana, which, once it filled his body, would give him incredible fighting power. Both options looked incredibly beneficial and wonderful, but the guy still couldn't figure out which one to choose. When Ray had already decided what would be best for him, he smiled and clicked on the desired option on the screen. He liked this turn of events because he had already experienced the peak of nothingness, and a new challenge required a new option. The system sent two messages saying that Ray had chosen cultivation and that his body would absorb mana, which frightened the guy. The result was immediate, and in an instant, the boy's body took on colossal proportions that he had never had before. The girls were still talking, and the friend was surprised why Sister Mina helped her brother, who had a lower level in the game. The girl did not understand her friend's surprise and said that she was just giving him advice on the game and teaching him the finer points. Although in reality it looked like a hurricane or chaos wherever Ryan was, the girl bombarded him with conversations. Her friend still didn't understand her concerns and said that sooner or later the guy would meet the monster and figure out how to deal with it himself. Sister Mina nervously said that even if that were the case, her brother wouldn't need much time to do so. She was right because the guy was already delivering crushing blows to the giant foxes with his powerful legs. The animals looked quite aggressive and obviously wanted to attack the boy, but Ray quickly struck them. It was unclear how many foxes had received painful blows to their paws and stomachs, but the boy's face was satisfied at that moment. Once again, Ray was indignant at the lack of challenge in these tasks. These creatures were easy prey again. He was distracted from his thoughts by some strange sounds, and the guy looked in the direction of the source of the sound. Now these angry foxes, which had managed to escape from Ray, were attacking a group of other players who had weapons and armor. From the outside, it looked pretty good. The players were trying to defeat the animals, but something bothered Ray. He turned to the system, and a blue screen appeared in front of him with the necessary information. Among the pile of numbers and letters, he did not understand where the specific scores and indicators came from. The balance and development of his character as a player did not suit the guy, so he crossed his arms and began to mutter discontentedly again. He looked around and decided to continue along the strangely shaped stone mountain. He was not going to stand still. More precisely, he was not going to just walk. With a few jumps, Ray covered a considerable distance and found himself at the bottom of the cliff. Two players noticed this quick method of covering distance, and it surprised them greatly. Where Ray appeared, there was a dungeon, and this place was dangerous for players in general. Nevertheless, the boy was not concerned and headed straight for the center of this place along the stone surface. It is not surprising that the player was surprised by the young man's actions, because large wolves with red eyes were already waiting for Ray. To be more precise, they were blue wolves of the 25th or 26th level. The young man noticed a sharp change in their level, but that didn't stop him from getting into a fighting stance to attack. The wolves slowly approached the young man, surrounding him on all sides, growling aggressively and showing their aggression towards the stranger. Suddenly, in an instant, everything changed dramatically as the creatures desperately began to flee in the opposite direction. Something was happening behind Mina, so he turned his eyes fearfully toward the source of the sound. Above him stood an incredibly scary and tall bear, with spikes on its back and many teeth in its mouth. Although the boy was brave and courageous, he froze and stood still at the sight of such an uninvited guest. The bear opened its huge mouth and began to growl frantically and loudly. It was the Lord of the Wild Forest, level 35. The creature looked incredibly scary, but our main character did not lose his composure and took its appearance as a joke. The bear continued to growl frantically and rushed towards our main character, exposing its large claws. Deftly dodging the immediate danger, he disappeared from the bear's sight, but the bear did not have time to react and crashed into a wall. While the giant bear disappeared in a cloud of dust, the boy braced himself for the impact. The creature did not lose consciousness or strength from the collision, and in a moment, two red, angry eyes appeared from the dust. The beast immediately pounced on the boy, trying to grab him with both paws, but Ray escaped from its clutches again. He asked the system to search for weak spots, and in a moment his eyes saw where to strike in the digital circle. Not only was he able to see the weak spot of such a surprisingly large creature, Ray rejoiced and prepared to attack. Such a large target was not a problem for the boy, so he was already standing in an attacking position with his fists outstretched. Meanwhile, the bear swung its large paw and almost hit the boy, who, fortunately, managed to escape again. No matter how hard the bear tried to grab his prey with his large limbs, he simply couldn't do it because the boy was so fast. Now it was Ray's turn to strike back, and he prepared to attack his furry opponent. Finally, the creature received the blow that our main character had been preparing for so long. The blow stunned the creature, and the bear began to stagger on his two paws, groaning. Our main character showed no mercy and struck him again, this time from the side, hitting him in the head. Gathering all his strength and fury, the boy shouted with all his might to deliver the final powerful blow. The next attack landed on the other side of the grizzly's head, delivered by our hero's fist. The final blow was a strong kick to the upper body of the giant hairy bear. The creature was obviously in great pain because his eyes were glowing with rage. A high and large shockwave rose at the sight of the battle, and the fight between the boy and the bear was over. The system displayed numerous congratulatory messages in front of our main character, praising his incredible abilities. Immediately after reading the congratulatory messages, Ray's gloves began to crack and fall to the floor in pieces. Due to the loss of his weapon and protection, the guy felt anxious. He was sad to lose this thing. After the sadness came a phase of rejection. Our Ray had bought these gloves with his own money, and now they were simply gone. The bear's body now resembled a hologram, glowing with a bright blue light and shimmering with pixels. Suddenly, two gloves appeared through his body. They were called bear paws, made of grizzly leather, and gave their owner strength. The boy immediately grabbed them and was incredibly happy because this item was of magical rank and added remarkable properties to his abilities. Putting on the new item, he asked the system to show his status. Remembering what Ryan had said, he remembered the conversation with his sister that day when she approached him and called out to him as he sat on the couch. She talked non-stop about how it was worth not touching the free points and accumulating them. The guy remembered that his sister had asked him to send her a message when he entered the game. Smiling, he decided that he was not in the game now. Having gotten rid of the problem, he exhaled and decided that now he could calmly focus on improving his level and characteristics. Meanwhile, in the final Saga office, all of his powerful and beautiful strikes during the fights were being broadcast. The woman in glasses was surprised, but at the same moment she was even more annoyed by Ray. The man asked if such an acquisition of awards and improvement of characteristics would disrupt the system and balance. For the woman in glasses, this statement was obvious, and she said venomously that he had hit the nail on the head. The dark-haired man asked excitedly if the task force specialist knew who this person was. Another man asked if the reason was the operator who used his ID to check the balance. The office was already buzzing with conversations and discussions about Yan Min's appearance, and the office was buzzing like a beehive. The woman with glasses exploded with aggression and started yelling at her employees, causing some of them to tremble. She yelled for them to redo the report on this user. She was annoyed that there was a lot of work in the office, and the situation did not look good at all. The woman was seriously angry and shouted that she would ask her boss all the pressing questions. Her employees were already holding her by the shoulders. She eventually calmed down when she was in her office and suggested that her colleague think logically. This young man was having a significant impact on the system, and it wasn't fair. She asked her colleague to keep a close eye on this new player and record all events. She was driven crazy by the fact that the player had obtained cultivation so easily, which is generally very difficult to do, and she did not understand what was going on at all. On the computer monitor, our main character was frantically chasing deer, and the animals looked frightened. Ray intended to cook bibimbap with them, which is why he was so persistently chasing the horned creatures. The events moved to the village of Barros, which was a place for newcomers. The place was protected by a high stone wall, and there were tents with shopkeepers at the bottom. A guard in a large helmet yawned lazily, even though he was supposed to be keeping a close watch. Hearing strange sounds, he straightened up sharply and raised his decorated spear, looking at the source of the sounds. Our main character was heading towards the village, looking cheerful and smiling easily, with new grizzly skin gloves on his hands. A stranger called out to him and asked the boy mockingly where he was from and where he had gotten such equipment. For some reason, the appearance of our men so amused these foolish characters that they made fun of him, not hiding their hostility. The guy who approached Min was probably ill-mannered or just rude, because he immediately asked him to lend him 10 coins. The bald man also approached and, laughing, asked for some extra items because, judging by Min's appearance, he seemed to have them. The boy's stress resistance was enviable because he simply exhaled, turned around, and walked away without saying a word. This so outraged these scoundrels that they immediately began to curse the stranger, calling him arrogant. From behind, the young man told them that, unlike them, he deserved these things and had decided to play alone so as not to encounter such individuals. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy that he would need money and would have to find a job for that. Thanks to the system, he quickly found a guild of fighters and was already standing at its doorstep. When our main character entered the room, he saw a huge man standing in front of him with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like an angry man and seemed dissatisfied with something. He asked the boy what he wanted. Min replied that he needed a job and hoped that this would not be a problem. The man's reaction showed that he was shocked. The man's behavior changed abruptly, and he immediately greeted him warmly, saying that the guest had come to the right place and was happy to have a client. Although his joy knew no bounds, he still asked the guest if he had come to the right place and if he was sure he had come to the right address. The young man became irritated and repeated that he wanted to work in this guild. He had the impression that this was not possible here. The man could not believe his ears, so he grabbed the guest by the arms and shouted, asking if what he was saying was true. He patted the young man on the shoulder and laughed, saying that a true martial arts connoisseur had finally come here and that he was at the right address. In a moment, they were standing in the middle of the room, and the burly man handed the young man a piece of paper across the table. The man suggested that in order to register with the guild, he simply had to place his palm on the sheet, and beautiful patterns appeared on it when he touched it. The man was extremely impressed when he deciphered the patterns and widened his eyes, realizing that the boy possessed cultivation. Min did not understand the man's reaction, but the man explained that he was very happy that his guest had chosen their guild and come to them. A table from the system appeared in front of him, informing him that Min had chosen the path of a novice fighter and that his main profession had been selected. Smiling, the guild owner handed him some books and asked him to choose one skill of his choice as a gift. Semi-transparent tables appeared in front of the guest, and it was clear that the young man was somewhat confused because he did not understand what skills were being referred to. The young man was somewhat disappointed that the skills offered were laughable, which explained why the place was empty. Min voiced his opinion about the skills and said that they were complete crap, to which the man began to frantically apologize. A moment later, the guild owner stood on the porch and watched his guest leave, apologizing sincerely again. Yeonmin left the guild because everything offered there was weak and inappropriate to him. He walked on and waved goodbye. The man looked at the boy from under his brow in a half-bow, and couldn't believe he had seen that very cultivation. His eye began to change externally. The pupil shimmered as if with electrodes, and in this way he transmitted data in an unknown direction. Meanwhile, our main character was walking down the street of the village, surrounded by locals and visitors. He was nervous because he intended to find and join the quest, but it was his first time here and his first time playing. He remembered how his sister taught him to memorize everything, study by heart, and try to raise his level. Yeonmin walked on, rubbing the back of his head, wondering whether to try fighting stronger opponents first. Meanwhile, fiery burning balls flew with a whistle at the green ogres, causing them excruciating pain. A monster with a bizarre shield and club was heading towards the other players, who were shooting arrows at him with bows. There were more ogres in the open space, and everyone was fighting. Each player had different weapons and shields. Our main character watched this action, rubbing his fists. Finally, he had found a clearing for hunting. The system informed Yeonmin that the monster near the players was a great orc of the 28th level, which was not bad. This monster was unlucky because an arrow flew into his hand, causing him severe pain. The arrow came from a red-haired girl who smiled excitedly and said that this monster also belonged to her. The monster's body was covered with countless arrows, and the creature was in great pain and growled frantically. The boy realized that this was how the players spotted their victims. by throwing arrows at them. When he turned his head in search of free prey, he saw the ogre and decided that it was well suited for this role. Suddenly, at that moment, a frantic cry rang out that this monster belonged to someone else, and the creature instantly burst into flames. Not far from the action, another player threw large blue crystals at the monsters. When the stone hit the monster, it was enveloped by the crystal and trapped in its embrace. Our main character began to run and think hard that at this rate, he would not get his prey. While Min was running, he saw a confused monster holding a club. Shouting that this monster belonged to him, the boy sped up and kicked it. The blow landed squarely on the confused monster's cheek, causing him to throw his head back. When the fight was over, the boy jumped to the floor while his victim was lying on the ground. As soon as he straightened up, recovering from the attack, someone shouted, expressing their indignation. A girl with a bow and arrows approached him, outraged that Min had not followed the rules of the game. As it turned out, she had initially tried to defeat the monster, but the boy took it away from her and claimed the result for himself. A quarrel broke out between the young people because no one could understand who had taken the monster first. Finally, the girl could think of nothing better to say than that this game was not for our main character. The girl turned around and walked away from her opponent, offended, and their dialogue ended as abruptly as it had begun. Our Ray was confused because he now didn't understand whether he was the first to take someone else's thing or if he was just really rude. He stood there and watched what the other players were doing and realized that everyone had their own strategy. The players acted in pairs, agreeing among themselves on their next moves in order to act in a coordinated and harmonious manner. The boy also realized that there were archers and mages gathered here, so he didn't understand what he was doing here because he was a melee fighter. Realizing that this place would offer him nothing, he looked at the towering mountains and understood that he had to move on. Something fell on the stone surface among the trees, causing a powerful explosion. Our main character, already with an excited look on his face, was fighting someone. His opponent was slow. His opponent was tall and hairy and had red glowing eyes. The young man struck him numerous blows. When the moment was right, the creature with tusks and a large hammer began to run frantically towards Minu. The boy was not afraid at all and only smiled when his giant opponent ran towards him. To finally intimidate his opponent, the monster screamed at the top of its lungs, opening its toothy mouth. Without hesitation, our Ray jumped off the ground and flew through the air above the monster's head. As it turned out, he was still annoyed that his opponent was moving too slowly during the battle. Blow after blow, he aimed directly at the monster's chest, causing it excruciating pain. Due to such a powerful wave of attacks, the creature fell to its knees, causing everything around it to shake. Now that his opponent was on his knees, Min was even more delighted and even praised him for his endurance. The creature probably wanted to rest between rounds, but the young man did not give him a chance to catch his breath and kicked him. When the competition ended, the system informed the young man that his level had risen from 25 to 28. Despite this achievement, our protagonist muttered that he was sorry there was only one creature here. While the young man was calmly reflecting on the end of the fight, a large stone flew through the sky. Fortunately, our main character managed to react in time and see the flying danger. When he turned around, he saw two monsters following him behind the rock on the horizon. They were identical to the monster that Min had knocked to the ground with a kick, and they looked at the boy with hostility. Seeing his new guests, the guy smiled with satisfaction because these creatures were so easy to remember. For the young man, such a group of creatures was not a difficult problem, so in a moment they were all lying beaten on the floor. Delighted with his victory, the boy thought happily and contentedly that now it was time to test his level. When the system shared the statistics of his achievements, Yeonmin was very happy because now he had enough to achieve his goal. When he had finally familiarized himself with the message from the system, the young man left the scene of the fight. He now had to move on, so after looking at the canyon, he decided to climb higher. The bushes were too thick and impenetrable, so the poor guy struggled to find his way through them. Suddenly, when he was able to stand on his feet, he saw an unknown person nearby behind the bushes. The system showed that it was a white cloud robber, and Minu didn't understand what he was going to do. It was a great opportunity to raise his level to 45, so the young man picked up a pebble from the ground. Before the blonde man realized that someone else was there, the stone flew into his forehead. Now there was a bump on his head, and this angered the robber so much that he began to scream frantically. Immediately after that, our main character made himself known. He was amused by what he had done. When the bandit saw his attacker, he immediately grabbed his sword and rushed towards him. When the man made a powerful swing, the boy immediately realized that his opponent was really strong and matched his level. Mina's new opponent made accurate and powerful swings, but our main character skillfully dodged them. The appearance of the uninvited guest angered the man, and he intended to fight him off. If it weren't for his opponent's aggressive attitude, Yeonmin was calm, because he knew that swordsmen attack diagonally. Unfortunately for him, the robber did not know how our main character would attack, so he immediately went straight up. When the man fell to the ground after his flight, he immediately asked angrily what the young man had done. For the boy, it was all like a game, so he jokingly asked if he really had to be beaten. Then he began to lecture him that the strong beat the weak, and, already on the ground, began to punch him with his hands. When he finished his disciplinary work, the man was shaking uncontrollably from the pain and muttering under his breath. The young man had a triumphant look on his face when he finished raising his level with this robber and looked away. Before his eyes was an area fenced in by fences, with two men standing on a watchtower with bows. The boy stood behind a rock and analyzed whether there was a place where he could pass, but there was not a single hole. This did not stop him, and he decided that he would deal with this problem himself and see his plan through to the end. He was right in thinking that there were no openings or holes in the fence, so he broke the boards with his fist. The guards immediately heard the crackling of wood and realized that something unexpected was happening. In a moment, the men below watched as the two flew toward them from the watchtower. When the guards were already on the ground, the tower fell after them with a loud noise. A young man unknown to all these people was running through its ruins. It was Armin. Such bold behavior and confidence of the uninvited guest greatly frightened the inhabitants of the settlement. While everyone stood frozen, the young man began to act and struck one of the residents directly on the head. The man did not even have time to fall to the ground before the young man attacked the next victim. Amidst the cries of the others who had been attacked, our Yan Min flew towards his next victims. I remembered one pleasant bright day when the young man was at home, busy with everyday chores. He was doing push-ups on one finger, and his sister was sitting on his back, asking how he would defeat a crowd of opponents. The boy replied that any crowd of opponents could be stopped if you knew one way. His sister listened attentively and asked what he was talking about, and he replied that the most effective way was to control the space. He explained that in such a case, it is worth moving the fight to a narrow space so that you can deal with your opponents one by one. Suddenly, Yan Min asked if the girl knew another way to fight a crowd, smiling as he spoke. When our main character was standing in front of the door in real time, he remembered this rule. With one powerful blow, the terrifying and sturdy door flew open with a loud explosion. Inside the cave were more men who were just as shocked by the guest's appearance as the previous ones on the street. So, in order to defeat the crowd of opponents, it was necessary to defeat their leader, which is what the guy was doing right now. With one hand, he delivered such a powerful blow that the unfortunate leader flew high into the air. Then he turned to his henchmen, who stood with their mouths agape, watching their leader being beaten. Of course, there were those who wanted to defend themselves or retaliate for the damage done to their leader, and a man ran at the young man with a sword. With one skillful movement on one leg, Min spun around and struck several people at once. The men standing nearby received a powerful blow to the chin from the uninvited guest's foot. While his opponents were recovering from the attack, the young man fled under the stone wall. Suddenly, tongues of fire began to appear from the newly formed cracks in the wall, which frightened the young man somewhat. Immediately after that, a hand protruded from the wall with great force, right in front of the young man's face. In front of Yan Min stood a new opponent wearing iron boots. In the hole in the stone wall stood a man who, at first glance, appeared to be quite huge, wearing armor and with impressive muscles. The blonde-haired man did not attack, but waited for the boy to strike first. The big guy spoke first and asked how long the boy was going to just stand there and do nothing, and Min immediately rushed into battle. His opponent did not lose his composure and immediately rushed towards him, trying to strike him with his huge shoulder. It looked terrifying, and our very brave protagonist was momentarily taken aback. The giant aimed his blow at the stone wall, after which there was an explosion and pieces of stone flew in all directions. Thank the gods, our hero immediately ran away from the blow before the big guy destroyed the solid stone wall, calming his shortness of breath and fear. While hanging from a chain under the ceiling, it dawned on the young man that the narrow space was not to his advantage. Our main character decisively left his hiding place. In front of the cave lay the iron door he had knocked down. Opposite the cave, his great rival was already waiting for him, surrounded by other people with weapons. He expressed his surprise that Yan Min was still there, as he had run away when he was hiding. The young man had already carefully thought out a strategy to defeat his opponent and decided that he needed to use his speed. When the big guy was already yelling for him to attack, the young man luckily realized that their fighting styles were similar. He immediately went on the attack and, as planned, moved super fast, realizing that it would be easier for him to predict his opponent's movements. The moment Min approached the big guy, he saw that he was swinging his huge fist to strike. When the fist reached its destination, the young man jumped high into the air to avoid the blow. Our main character was very lucky because the blow was so powerful that it made him squint. After doing a triple backflip, he landed on his feet, leaning on his arm to avoid injury. This action made the big guy laugh so much that he said that now the boy understood that he shouldn't have come here. The young man was not going to give up and was determined to knock out his opponent. Looking into the giant's burning eyes, the young man was glad that he got what he wanted. adrenaline, fear, and emotions. The giant wanted to attack again because he didn't want to leave the fight unfinished, so he raised his fist again with a shout. His size sometimes did not matter, as the smaller Yan Min skillfully dodged his blows. When he bent down, he was able to deliver a powerful blow from below to his large arm. Immediately after that, he began to pick up speed, heading straight for his opponent. Without giving him a chance to regroup or understand his next move, he delivered a powerful blow to the giant's chin with his foot. No matter how powerful the blow was, it did not stop the giant, and he used the earth-shaking technique, which sent the young man flying into the sky again. The man's face darkened with rage. He was very irritated by this uninvited guest with his boldness and persistence. Now he decided to pick up speed and strike his small opponent at full speed, running towards another watchtower. Now he raised his two large arms to strike, threatening that the boy would soon be drinking through a straw as a result of the blow. Unexpectedly for the young man, the giant changed his direction of movement, which greatly disoriented him. Anger and hatred transformed this man into a real monster who mercilessly wanted to finish him off. The next trick was a shockwave that was aimed a little poorly and passed by the boy's ear, who froze in horror. He blocked the wave with both hands, but biting his lower lip, he realized that he couldn't take it anymore. The young man winced from the shock or pain, dodging the possible consequences. Unfortunately, he was not spared injury, as he could not move his left arm, which he was holding to ease the pain. Unfortunately, there was no time for consolation because he was already surrounded by people of normal height, but they were armed and dressed in armor. When they were about to attack, a cry rang out from behind, and the giant told them to back off from the boy. He wanted so badly to finish off the uninvited guest himself that he shouted at them not to interfere and to leave him alone. Now only the giant stood before the boy, and he told him that it would be better to fight together, but he understood his choice. He added that it should be a good fight and that no one should interfere with the giant. The big guy responded positively. Their thoughts coincided, and they wanted to dedicate the fight to each other. The young man immediately went on the attack, rejoicing that he was finally participating in this game and feeling the tension and excitement. The man again used the shockwave technique, which swirled around his right arm like a whirlwind. Suddenly, something stopped him, and he stopped in front of his prey in confusion. For some reason, the young man suddenly fell right in front of his feet. Something was obviously wrong. While he was able to distract the enraged giant, the boy immediately struck him in the groin without hesitation. It was so painful that the giant restrained himself with all his might, clenching his teeth and tensing every muscle in his body. After enduring the wave of pain, the madman stood up again and swung his arm, which was clenched into a fist. The young man decided to strike using a new tactic, so instead of running away, he grabbed the giant's hand. He skillfully grabbed his arm and injured it, just as he had been injured, and the man felt another wave of pain. Without wasting any time, Yan Min let go of his opponent's hand and jumped away from him like a ball. Showing his injured hand, he said that now they were on equal terms with the giant, hinting at his injury. This action was equivalent to how a bull would react to a red rag. He became very angry and wanted to crush the boy with his foot. When the foot was almost within reach of Min, the enraged giant rejoiced at his victory for a moment. But here too, he was one step ahead, kicking him again in the chin. Despite his small stature, our protagonist was still able to reach the man's chin. This time, the blow did not go unnoticed because the big guy now had his teeth knocked out, which flew away in pieces. Now he was able to defeat him because the giant fell flat on his back with a thud and was knocked out. The defeated man's accomplices stood there, unable to believe their eyes. They couldn't believe that this could have happened to their boss. This victory was truly joyful, and the system immediately began sending a bunch of messages. Another gift in honor of the victory was the instant recovery of his injured left arm, which was now whole and unharmed. The body of the strong man looked like a hologram, and a mysterious box rose above him. The young man assumed that this prize could be legendary. While the young man was receiving awards for his desperate victory, the men around him whispered about whether they should take revenge for their boss. Yangmin had the prize in his hands and tried to escape from this crazy place. The defeated leader's friends had no intention of letting him go, so when they saw him running away, they immediately tried to stop him. The young man quickly chose his route and ran away among the debris of metal, stones, and boards. The men stood and shouted but did not dare to run after their new enemy, so they stood and glared angrily at his back. Some time passed, and a fist in a red glove was already flaunted in front of the unknown man's face. The men were knocked down by the shockwave and were quite shocked. This chaos was caused by our main character, who was throwing men around with his bare hands. Almost nothing remained of the peaceful and intact settlement. Much had been destroyed. In this way, Yan Min explained to his sister how to control space correctly in order to win. He added that it was necessary to move the fight to a narrow space where it would be possible to deal with each opponent one by one or in small groups. Now he did not give up and felt elated and excited, and pointed his finger at his opponents to attack him. They obediently did what the uninvited guest asked, and, grabbing their weapons, rushed into the attack. The plane ended abruptly, and the river fell down, forming a waterfall that splashed merrily. On the bank of the same river, under a tree in the shade, Yeonmin stood and looked where the water fell and disappeared from view. He was looking for something because he was looking around and turning his head in different directions, as if he had arrived at his destination. He held in his hands the prize for defeating the leader of the bandits, a map that pointed to an unknown place in the mountains of the White Cloud. This map led our main character to this very waterfall and indicated that he had arrived at his destination. He wanted to check something with the system, so a semi-transparent blue screen immediately appeared in front of them. He was not yet at the place where the map had led him. He had to climb to the very top of the waterfall, which he was not thrilled about. He walked over the precipice and muttered that in movies there is usually a cave behind a waterfall, and this path made him nervous. No wonder he was worried. One wrong move and he would fall straight into the water below. Plunging into the light blue water, he sank to the bottom, surrounded by air bubbles. Suddenly, the system reported that the test had been activated when the card fell into the water. He instantly teleported to another place and was suddenly blinded by a bright white light. He covered his eyes with his hand. The boy stood in a stone-paved circle in an unknown place with no one else around. The system displayed a sign in front of the boy's face, informing him that the second phase of the test had been activated. While Yeon-min was analyzing the information presented to him, someone stomped loudly behind him. When he turned his head, he saw unknown creatures with red eyes standing in front of him. In any case, they were hostile. When the system displayed another message and asked him to pacify the animated puppets, they were already running towards the young man. The test began too quickly and without warning, so the young man was visibly nervous. He was still on his knees, and the wave of emotions and excitement made him feel sick. As soon as he felt better, the boy began to fight off the puppets, not knowing when they would end. He was surrounded by even more of them, and he understood that he had no choice but to finish them off. Another puppet received Yeonmin's signature blow to the chin, which stopped it for a moment. From such blows, the doll fell to the floor on its back, unable to control its limbs. The number of opponents made the boy anxious and angry, as there was no respite from the attacks. Already angry, Yeonmin hit the doll in the chest, gritting his teeth and gathering all his strength. For a moment, it seemed that he had succeeded because the puppets began to fall apart. But unfortunately, it was too early to rejoice because all the pieces they fell apart into stuck back together, and the puppet stood intact. Once again, Yeon-min was faced with a multitude of puppets, and Min thought that to pacify them, he had to destroy them. But he was wrong. The system signaled that a visual test was coming when a doll ran at the boy. When the young man looked at the puppet's stomach, he realized what the system meant. It was the creature's weak spot. Now the system announced that the third phase of the endurance test was underway, and his body was overcome with indescribable pain. The young man grimaced and endured the unpleasant sensations with all his strength, guessing that this was the test. There was no choice. So the boy again went on the attack against the creatures, of which there were still quite a few. Suddenly, the system displayed a scale of life and magical energy, and the young man realized with fear that they were running out. The situation was getting out of control because his vital indicators were running out and his opponents were not going to stop. While the puppets mercilessly attacked with great numbers, Yeon-min thought that he had to hold out until the end. Time passed, the number of puppets remained unchanged, and his life indicators were rapidly and treacherously falling. The puppets attacked from all sides, even jumping from above to confuse him. The smile on our main character's face slowly faded because the situation did not change, and he continued to deliver futile blows. He had 5% of his health left, and the young man was already tired of fighting. It all seemed like a senseless and endless game of puppets, attacking, and nothing changed. He grabbed the next doll by the head with his hand, which was in a red glove, to deliver a more accurate blow. Then he hit it so hard that the puppet's head split in half. Throwing away the remains of the annoying and disgusting puppet, he jumped away and landed on the ground. This was the last action, after which the system announced that the second phase of the test was over, and the boy smiled. Now, after such a brutal battle, Yeon-min returned to the place where he had appeared and met his opponents. Suddenly, he realized with incredible joy that the pain that had tormented him was gone. Now the system informed him that many of his characteristics had increased fivefold. This made the young man very happy, but he was even more pleased that the pain had stopped. He stopped nearby and saw a blue ball among the destroyed puppets. He glanced indifferently at the ball, picked it up, and suspected that it was loot from the puppets. Suddenly the ball burst, and the boy stood there with his mouth open, watching. His precious hands, which he had received in battle with the grizzly, glowed orange. The gloves remained in place, but a milky mist swirled around our main character. An unknown girl began to appear in front of him, who was also wearing gloves, had a cloak, and short red hair. When the teleportation was complete, she smiled sweetly and greeted the boy. The poor guy didn't understand whether she was a guest or an enemy, and immediately lunged at the girl with threats. The young man jumped back, and the girl did not understand why he would start a losing battle when there was such a gap in their abilities. She assumed that the guy was some kind of lunatic and watched as he ran towards her at full speed. She laughed and said she understood that the battle was difficult, but they needed to discuss something. The girl exhaled, kicked the floor hard, pushed off, and rushed forward with a sly smile. With her powerful jump, she spun our men around as if in a whirlpool. Then he landed and hit the ground very hard. It was unclear what the girl wanted to do with this. A few seconds later, the poor young man was screaming loudly because he couldn't even move from the pain. In this way, the girl stopped him and praised him for trying to counterattack at the last moment. She warned him that he would not be able to move for some time and that he should just listen carefully now. The goddess explained that she was offering him a test and giving him the opportunity to follow in her footsteps and become one of the strongest. She held out her hand as a sign of probable agreement, expecting a positive response, but the young man looked at her suspiciously. The system clarified that this was an offer from the goddess of war and that it was a quest, and now she was waiting for his answer. This was unexpected for the young man, and he just sat and stared at the system's screen, looking confused. The goddess waited patiently and said that she was still waiting for a response to the offer. Yongmin was very hesitant. The girl seemed skilled, but it was illogical to go through the game and then become the strongest. The only thing he answered the goddess now was the question of whether he would become stronger than the goddess herself. The red-haired girl was very amused by this question and replied that, although he was brave and skilled, he would not be able to become stronger than her. This did not suit the guy, and he thoughtlessly refused, and the goddess immediately burst into anger at how he dared to refuse her. The system reported the refusal of the goddess's offer, and the boy added that there was no point in doing so if he did not become stronger than the goddess herself. The woman was still furious and said that the young man was not supposed to move for another 3 minutes, but somehow he had taken control of his body. The goddess looked at the expression on the young man's face and was amazed at his determination and resolve. He really wanted to defeat her. While Min stood there with his fists clenched and a look of dissatisfaction on his face, the girl suddenly laughed at his appearance. Spreading her arms, she said that he had won, but the young man still did not understand what she was talking about or why she was laughing. Then she suddenly said that she wanted to make him her follower because he had potential and, in that case, he would become stronger than her. While the guy stood there with his mouth open, the goddess began to search for something in an unexpected place, right between her breasts. She took out a book with a red cover, and that was what she was looking for. The woman patted the guy on the shoulder. The goddess mercifully gave her gift, placing it on the ground in front of the boy. Yongmin said nothing at that moment, but simply looked at his unexpected guest, squinting one eye, and received the divine book. The boy remembered his sister's advice. She said that there were no more than 30 legendary items in the game and that they were of the highest rank. Unfortunately, Yongmin did not listen at the time because he fell asleep and snored, drooling as he dozed. It was a little strange because, at first glance, a simple book of skills had a divine rank. The goddess explained that even if he mastered the skills from the book, he would not become an imitator and would not even surpass his own performance. The boy realized that in real life, he also did not focus on one martial art, such as Taekwondo. While he was standing there thinking, the goddess turned to him and told him to watch what she was going to do. With force and speed, she put her fist in front of her as if trying to hit someone. In front of the redhead was a wall, which she smashed with one swing of her arm, causing the wall to crack and crumble. When the boy saw what this girl was capable of, he rubbed the back of his head and realized that she was the one he wanted to fight. The goddess said she would not reveal what technique it was because he had to learn everything himself and choose his own path. She finished speaking and finally said that she had some parting words for him. The boy was left alone, and on the ground lay a blue stone, which was a fragment of the goddess of war's soul. Yongmin held the precious stone in his hands and had no idea what to do with it. When he remembered that he had a book from the goddess, he rejoiced and grabbed it, throwing the fragment somewhere. When the boy opened the book, a small version of the goddess of war jumped out of it, which frightened the poor boy very much. She said that if he wanted to become stronger, he had to try hard and first try hard to achieve something. The condition of the quest was that he had to reach level 50 without using any free points. The little goddess of war solemnly announced the conditions of the quest, but it seemed too funny and pointless. She realized that despite her efforts, nothing was happening, while the boy realized that he had never used free points. This greatly angered the red-haired girl because, in her opinion, it was completely unfair. Since he hadn't even used them, he didn't understand the reaction of the assistant from the book at all. The girl disappeared as unexpectedly as she had appeared from the book, scaring Mina. Now beams of light were directed at him, and blue translucent pixels were flying around him. In a moment, he was already falling from high in the sky, realizing that he was outside again. In the canyon, among the green bushes, you could see the shockwave from our main character's fall. He landed very badly and was shaking with pain, not understanding why he was in the air at all. He got up and looked ahead in shock, realizing that he had finally returned. Then he looked at his palm in a red glove and was glad that he had not returned empty-handed. When the system reported the unreal characteristics of these gloves, the guy decided to try them out right away. When he found a good target to test their strength, he swung and looked focused. How surprised Min was when the system started sending a bunch of messages saying that his level was too low for these gloves. The system's compromise was that the gloves would now be reconfigured to the player's current level, and they immediately began to sparkle. The task from the Goddess of War was completed, and the gloves lowered their characteristics to ridiculous levels, which greatly upset the guy. The system made itself known once again, informing him that a fragment of the Goddess of War's soul had reacted to the Elemental Lord's item. Now he was able to attack the elements of fire. His gloves glowed with orange flames, and now our young man was satisfied. Now he could test them on the very target he wanted to play with at first. The trees flew apart from the power. When he saw what had happened to the trees, he understood the power these unusual gloves possessed. He needed to find 5 more fragments of the goddess's soul, and when he found them, he could fight her. His face beamed with happiness. He also remembered that some of his characteristics had improved and decided to test them later. He stood by the waterfall again and looked at the water. Now he decided to leave this location. The task was complete. While the young man was exploring the game areas, the airport was filled with people, each busy with their own business. His sister Mina was there, and they talked on the phone, and the young man asked her for some money and items. The girl was impressed that he had come to the newbie zone in a week, and that he really liked the game. She came up with an idea and decided to write to him in the game chat, picking up her phone again. The girl's name was Rachel, and she wrote a bunch of messages to her brother, but when he said he had received a natural boost, she was surprised. Rachel's assumption that her brother was at level 30 was wrong because he wrote that he was at level 50, which shocked the girl. The girl praised him and promised to send him items and money. And when the guy asked how to use the free points, she couldn't believe her eyes. Rachel was very surprised that her brother had not used any points yet. Min continued to correspond with her. After such a heated conversation, he stood up and realized that he was feeling a little sick and looked tired. While he was thinking about getting items and using his free points, pixels appeared around him. After they appeared, he felt noticeably better, smiled, and decided to get back to work. Our main character continued walking down the streets, and a person watched him from above. It was a girl with bright red hair. She smiled and asked someone about the guy below. The men around her confirmed that this was the one they were looking for, and that he had obviously changed his equipment, which could be stolen and sold for good money. One of them suggested that he could be a strong player posing as a beginner, but his friend said that couldn't be. In that case, the man calmed down and said that he would like to change his weapon. The area was vast, with canyons and abandoned buildings, and there were no animals or people anywhere. Among the living creatures, there was only Min, who was looking for a certain road. Suddenly, he heard someone desperately crying for help. It was the same girl from the roof. The guy heard her. She was running away from a giant gray-haired orc who was level 53. She was running too fast and had bad shoes, and she tripped and fell to the ground in front of the monster. Having had a bitter experience, Min hesitated a little about whether to help, so that he would not be accused of stealing the mob. Still, he decided to help, approached the girl, stood in front of her, and told her to hide immediately. The size of the angry orc was impressive. He held a large sharp axe in his hands and had massive fangs and muscles. The girl was cunning and understood that this orc was probably higher in rank than those in the newbie zone, but the young man had already attacked him. As a result, the trick did not work, and the girl looked at him without hiding her surprise. While the boy waved his hand, the orc had already disappeared from view, and she couldn't believe that he had defeated him with a single blow. The rescuer finished off the big monster and walked away, and the girl asked him to stop, dissatisfied. The guy didn't understand the situation at all, and indifferently told her that he had just accidentally stolen her prey. The girl lost control and didn't get what she wanted, which made her visibly upset. Suddenly, an arrow flew out of the leaves of the trees and bushes at high speed, aimed at someone in particular. The recipient was Yeonmin, but fortunately, the weapon flew past his neck in an arc. Although the arrow had to curve around his neck, it landed right next to his heel. At the top of the cliff stood 2 men who were the girl's accomplices. They were the ones who had shot the arrow. They decided to attack Yeonmin and jumped off the cliff onto the ground in front of him. The boy felt confident because he had activated a mode where he would not be punished for killing other players. In that case, he had no doubts and ran to attack them with such a privilege, it was the end for them. The larger man was very angry about this, called him a puppy, and swung his axe. While he was shouting, the young man already kicked him in the side. The pain was so intense that the big man grabbed his side, and he turned red from the sensation. Resigned to the surprise, he said that he had not expected this and received a blow to the chin. His friends gasped in surprise. They should have run away or not started this stupid prank in the first place. The blonde guy, who was the big guy's buddy, immediately grabbed his bow to get revenge for his friend. All 4 arrows he shot hit Min's butt, which he used to cover himself. Having found the weak spot of the loser, he caught him off guard with his cunning trick, which was unexpected for his opponent. The red-haired girl exploded with rage. She was not at all happy with this turn of events, and her friend, with arrows in his butt, flew to the side. She ran up to the guy and hit him very hard in the side, causing him to grit his teeth. This even made the young man laugh, and he asked if the girl knew what happens to those who attack by surprise. Before she could understand what was happening, he grabbed her by the arm, threw her down hard, and slammed her back against the ground. There was one more friend left, who already had a crossbow with dozens of arrows at the start, which he wanted to use. He shouted that the young man would suffer and pulled the trigger, after which the arrows began to fly towards Minu, as if from an automatic weapon. Our main character managed to get out of this situation by jumping and doing somersaults, and the arrows flew right past his body. The man did not expect such a turn of events, and, cursing loudly, froze in shock. Cornered, he wished death upon the nimble boy and already grabbed his sword to fight back. No matter how he swung it, every move failed to reach the hated boy, who flew away from the sword like an insect at great speed. Yeonmin decided to add fuel to the fire by asking his enraged opponent if he was sure that a sword would be more effective than a crossbow. The boy continued to swing his weapon, and the young man said that he would not succeed. The man blocked the blow aimed at him with his hands around the sword, but the young man's hand was under them. This friend obviously lacked logic and agility, so he received a blow to the heel, which turned him blue. When he fell, Min asked mockingly if he appreciated his powerful blow. The last thing the man said before losing consciousness was that our main character was a bastard, not hiding his irritation. When the scoundrels were scattered in all directions, the system announced that our main character had moved to a new level. Looking at the girl, he was surprised because it turned out that these scoundrels had a fairly high level if they managed to raise his. On the ground, he found a lost small sword that looked more like a knife, and he was pleasantly surprised to have a trophy. When the robbers were finished, he thought it was worth continuing the hunt, and decided to leave from the side where the orc had come. The young man went on, and when he came to a cliff below, he saw a small settlement with tents and a bunch of torches. The young man realized that this was some kind of lair, and that perhaps the point of the quest was to kill the leader and free the captives. Men and women were sitting in wooden cages. Some of them even had their hands tied. Meanwhile, the robbers had come to their senses, and the big guy was indignant that it turned out to be an undercover professional after all. The blonde man was annoyed and said that this was definitely not an undercover agent, but perhaps a person with no personal life. While the men were arguing about the identity of the attacker, the girl started screaming because all her belongings had been taken away. The blonde man still dismissed her concerns and said that it was not the right time and that there were more important things to do. As it turned out, she was not satisfied with this reaction and asked if he was angry with her now. Now our main character had a fierce enemy, and the blonde man promised that he would catch him. The big guy was surprised by this decisive reaction and asked if he was going to call someone. The blonde man replied that those he would call would deal with the young man, no matter how much money he had invested in this game. The system immediately responded and lit up its screen for the call. When the blonde man complained about the young man with rare items, his interlocutor was outraged by their greed. When the man heard that they had failed to find a target for the deliberate destruction of the player, he pretended that the connection was bad. The interlocutor on the screen replied that he should share the coordinates and he would soon be there. The blonde man was delighted. The man with whom the bandit had just spoken, sitting on the defeated character, said he was shocked by the actions of his guild member. He turned to his friends and asked if it was time to start hunting, and they smiled contentedly. The lair with tents was suffering from explosions, and splinters of wood were already flying above them. The orc, who was drinking something from a wooden mug, immediately heard a strange sound and began to listen to it. The source of the sound immediately began to destroy his tent and break the wooden fastenings. All this was done by Yeonmin, who mercilessly destroyed tents, broke boards, and tore fabric. He left ruins behind him, and the orcs inside the tents could not get out and begged for help. Just a moment ago, this lair was silent and intact, and now there were only broken tents and crippled inhabitants of the settlement. When the orc who was drinking from a mug stood up and started screaming, he immediately felt a powerful blow to his cheek. This was followed by Yeonmin's signature flying kick straight to the face. The creature was knocked out for a moment and rolled his eyes from the surprise and the blow. Similar creatures still lying under the rubble of tents watched in amazement, their mouths agape. Suddenly, the two found the courage to threaten the boy, saying that if he didn't stop, they would do something to him. The young man believed that they would not be able to stop themselves and began to beat and trample them with his feet. Another orc was unexpectedly hit by an arrow that entered his shoulder, and he screamed in pain. The other creatures suffered the same fate, and unknown assailants began to shoot them with arrows en masse. The young man looked at the wounded orc next to him and realized that there were no archers in the settlement. When all the creatures fell silent and fell to the ground, a group of other players was already walking towards him. He was greeted by a group of men who had come here at the request of the robber. They stood in front of the boy and began to mock him, although their praise was more like ridicule. Our main character looked at them, and I saw that their eyes were glowing red. He guessed that they were in RC mode. Although they did not come with good intentions, they stood there and did nothing but laugh. Min thought that they were afraid. He also realized that the players were at level 69, which was the maximum level that could be achieved near the village of Biros. The boy hesitated because he himself was level 52, but there was hope for free points that would increase some characteristics. This gave him a lot of motivation, so the young man smiled and decided to give those 5 scoundrels a piece of his mind. The young man was already getting into an attacking stance while the group of players mocked him insolently. One of the men jumped up and was already pulling the bowstring with an arrow to hurt the young man. The leader of the group of scoundrels mockingly warned him to be careful, but the archer said he would quickly deal with this weakling. The man with the bow skillfully shot one arrow after another at Yan Min. The boy was born under a lucky star, because none of the arrows could harm him. They flew past him as if he were invisible. He even managed to find the right moment to punch the brave man in the jaw. Immediately after the archer, the leader of the group appeared with a large mace, wanting to avenge his friend. This angry man's weapon was quite dangerous, but Min managed to dodge its swing. The players didn't even give him a chance to rest and were already aiming at him with more arrows, probably wanting to corner him. The blue-haired guy gritted his teeth and continued to swing his sharp and dangerous mace. The boy caught the angry man with blue hair because, despite his strength, he couldn't even hit him. The boy, who had already jumped out of the way of the mace's blow, was met with foul language, and the leader of the group of scoundrels still couldn't hit his opponent, just as Min had said. Strength was useless here. The man was annoyed that despite his attempts to finish off his opponent, he was still alive and had stepped on the mace. When the leader was distracted, our main character managed to quickly deliver 2 painful blows to his face. The final stage of the fight was a signature kick to the chin. The brave man's eyes even turned white from the blow to his face, and he threw his head back weakly. At that very moment, dozens more arrows flew at the young man, but he managed to dodge them again. The man with the bow and arrows turned sharply and asked if his colleague was okay. The leader was sitting behind him, recovering from the beating, and the archer realized that he would not be able to stay there for long. Yang Min thought it was dangerous to get closer, so he decided to run away and shouted for them to try to catch him. Another archer joined the blonde man, and now they were trying to stop the fugitive together. Now the arrows were flying around the boy again, but that was exactly what he wanted, for them to catch up with him. The boy managed to escape, and the losers walked around looking for him in the forest, marveling at his skill. One of the archers cursed them to search better instead of talking, and the blonde archer said he couldn't see anything. Now the other man realized that they had lost their desired prey, and finally cursed him. Now they decided to leave this place and accept that they had lost such a chance. Suddenly, our main character appeared almost silently out of thin air and kicked someone again. The blow was aimed at the hated blonde archer, and a wave of pain contorted his face. Those who were still standing couldn't believe that the guy was able to knock out one person with a single blow. With a single gesture, he pointed at the two and said that they were next. They grabbed their weapons, but their reaction showed that they were confused, and they began to swear again. When the weapons were aimed at the young man, he began to slowly dissolve into thin air. This shocked the 2 archers again, and one of them suggested that the young man had used his ability to become invisible. One man with an unspeakable vocabulary shouted that now the young man could appear from any side. Meanwhile, the young man hid in a tree, and now he had the upper hand in the battle with the bow, and having the equipment, he was stronger. He was indeed right, because the boy really attacked them unexpectedly from an unexpected point. He once again used his signature move to knock his opponent to the ground. Once again, bad words were directed at the young man, but he was already heading for the second man who was drawing his bow. He struck slightly lower than usual, not in the face but in the chest, but it was no less painful. The archer fell to the ground, and Yan Min fell on top of him, taking his bow. Then, when there were no more obstacles or auxiliary weapons for defense, the young man clenched his fists. He had no pity for this friend and hit him right in the bridge of the nose. The archer no longer defended himself and spread his arms to the sides while the young man punched him in the face. The young man had to flee from the barrage of arrows again, but he managed to save himself by doing a somersault. Looking at the criminal, he thought that he had almost found himself in a dangerous situation. Suddenly, something strange enveloped his body. He couldn't move at all and just stood there. The evil archer laughed and asked if he thought he would just stand there waiting to be hit in the face. The young man still did not move, and the man explained that this skill was called shadow paths. Realizing that he couldn't use stealth against the novice, he decided to rely on his strength. The archer began to laugh at what he saw because even a novice knew that it made no sense. The man called him a smurf, which surprised the young man as much as it did the man. The man was surprised, and the boy thought that this guy was not a smurf and was a dangerous player. The archer added that he would destroy him now while he was still green. smiling slyly. He pulled out a piercing arrow and said that he would destroy him until he left the game for good. As promised, dozens of arrows flew straight at his face. Memories of a movie where men were dressed in cloaks and hats for a duel came to mind. Rachel was watching TV and asked her brother, who was flexing his muscles, if he could dodge the shot. When he heard his sister's question, he agreed without hesitation and said he would explain everything now. The young man said that you need to know when your opponent is going to shoot, and then you can dodge the shot. The boy was right because the archer, who had aimed well, still missed and was angry because of it. The man launched a rain of arrows, but luckily, the system now said that shadow paths no longer worked. This was very timely because he was able to escape several well-aimed arrows and avoid injury. The boy was already running to attack his opponent in return, but the man smiled suspiciously. He shouted the command to take him, and a huge gray angry wolf appeared above the boy. While the heavy creature flew toward one point, the boy ducked and ran right under it. Now he ran towards the archer again and shouted that he should not even dream of catching him. The cunning archer miscalculated his strategy again because the young man fell into a trap that was large enough to fit even a bear. It was very painful, and the young man grimaced in surprise. The man was already happily celebrating his victory and said that all that was left was to get the boy. Not only was he trapped, but a wolf with claws and teeth was flying at him again. The man again gave the command to harm the young man, which made him even more angry, and he bared his sharp teeth even more. What the archer, who had triumphed prematurely, saw shocked him so much that he opened his mouth. The wolf's large body rose into the air from the accurate blow to its stomach by Yan Min. He was still standing with one foot in the trap that had clamped onto his skin, and with the other he was beating the creature. The man was so shocked that he grabbed his bow and arrows again. Once again, the annoying arrows flew past the young man and landed behind him. This annoyed Min so much that he promised to tie the archer's hands and feet. Now the bold and courageous man screamed in fear and pain and flew high above the ground from the shockwave. It was caused by our main character, who frantically and defiantly punched him under the legs. It was a technique involving fire, and now his opponent was powerless and unable to use the shadows. He had already stopped the archer, but the wolf had come to its senses and attacked again. Calling the creature a break, he smiled and swung his fist again. Only the archer, who did not expect this, was hit, not the wolf. The blow was so lightning fast that the bow was still hanging in the air while the wolf flew at the lying scoundrel. While the owner was knocked out, the wolf began to slowly dissolve into the air and become transparent like a cloud. Our main character looked frightened and tired, and was glad that, fortunately, he had survived. He stood in a clearing among tall trees, surrounded by the daring archers and their friends. A blue screen appeared in front of the boy, and he concluded that these people's abilities were not as bad as he had thought. He remembered his sister's advice. After reaching level 70, items do not drop from newbies. The young man realized that he could cope with experienced RC players, and behind him, the arrogant leader came to his senses. Hearing an unfamiliar sound, the young man turned around and saw a man standing there, steam coming out of his mouth with rage. He saw that all his guild members were lying scattered, beaten, and defeated on the grass. Now, with his level increased, our men could fully enjoy his revenge and give this arrogant man a beating. When the man realized what he had gotten himself into, he turned pale with fear and only groaned in response. Soon, a beautiful city with incredible architecture that delighted the eye with its colors appeared before us. Yan Min walked through its streets, surrounded by these colorful buildings and people in different clothes and weapons. When they noticed our main character, they began to whisper in amazement because they knew who he was. Everyone was impressed by the fact that he was a newcomer, the items he had, and how quickly he completed quests. He walked silently, but people did not stop to look at him and followed his back with attentive glances. Suddenly, Yan Min felt a suspicious gaze on him and, tensing up, cautiously looked around. When he scanned the crowd, he saw a bunch of eyes that didn't take their gaze off the guy. His assumptions were correct, and as expected, many people were watching him. The young man entered a bright room that was a goblin shop where money, supplies, and equipment could be stored. A pretty green-haired girl greeted the young man and asked if he wanted to use any services. He readily agreed and poured 3 colorful bows onto the counter, which he had obtained in battle with robbers. The people in the room were surprised, but someone in the back said that these bows belonged to one person. The 2 men thought the young man had taken the bait like a fish and glared at him aggressively. Without leaving the room, he opened the system screen to select a quest. Now the place was much more picturesque, with pillars and walls decorated with carvings and ornaments. Unlike the previous place, there were already people here at the beginning of his stay. The group of people was quite large and many of them were holding spears. They were all waiting for someone under a huge door. The wait for a certain person was dragging on, and one of the men asked if he was really coming. The man said that as soon as the person they needed came out of the dungeon, they would immediately finish him off on the spot. The other men stood ready but did not understand why it was so quiet in this room. Suddenly, a large deep crack appeared on one of the walls, which immediately caught the attention of those present. After that, There was a powerful explosion, causing pieces of stone to fly from the wall, injuring those standing nearby. Those who were standing a little further away were unharmed and discussed what had happened without mincing words. An unknown person emerged from the darkness of the room and said that he had not expected this. It was our Yan Min. He looked energized and was surprised to see everyone gathered there. Then, looking at those present, he expressed his guess that they were following him, but they had set up an ambush. One of the men still did not give up and mockingly belittled the young man's abilities. In response to the mockery that he had nothing, Min pulled out 3 test tubes with potions, smiling slyly. The man did not expect this and, opening his mouth wide, called him a scoundrel. The boy immediately drank the contents of one of the test tubes, and the system reported an increase in strength and agility. After that, he stamped his foot hard, causing the participants of the ambush to fly high up to the ceiling. The road was now clear and Min raced down it frantically, not hiding his crazy smile. He was angry at these people because they wanted to take his life in such a senseless way. Now he decided to take revenge and, to begin with, kicked one of the men in the head. Another aggressive and dangerous-looking man grabbed a spear and also rudely insulted the young man. The young man grabbed the same spear by its wooden base and looked angrily at its owner. For such audacity, the daredevil immediately received a painful and brutal blow to the face. Then, jumping up, he hit him again with his knee in the chin, despite the fact that the man was defending himself with a spear. The potion's effect wore off, and he decided to take a risk and now desperately beat those present. At this turn of events, the other men tensed up and decided to surround the young man. They did not even have time to react and understand where the young man was because he was already flying through the air. After that, defying the laws of physics, he began to run at high speed along the wall. As in the good old days, dangerous sharp arrows with multiple blades were flying at him. Fortunately, Yan Min noticed this and was able to dodge them and remain unharmed. Hiding behind the wall and escaping the arrows, the guy was surprised at how fast they were moving. The men were indeed fast, but at the same time they were no less irritated, and almost all of them aimed their bows at the boy. The boy picked up a small shield from the floor, which he skillfully used to defend himself from the annoying arrows. With the help of his shield, he was able to get closer to the men and kick one of them. The players gradually fell helplessly to the floor because the boy mercilessly beat them and gave them no chance to recover. One of the men looked ahead and saw only the simple interior of their opponent's temple. There was nothing else. Panic broke out among the crowd because of Min's disappearance, and they muttered that they had to find him immediately. Meanwhile, the young man watched their panic from the corner of the room and smiled smugly. Looking at the confused players with bows and arrows, he realized that the hunt was just beginning. The tension was mounting, and one of the men, unable to find the right words, was visibly irritated by the disappearance. The men came to the conclusion that teleportation scrolls did not work in this place, and that the boy could not have gone far. The dark-haired man with a beard could no longer stand it and began to shout in anger, irritated by the young man's disappearance. After his shout, everyone present felt that some kind of strange, unfamiliar sound was coming from somewhere. Several pairs of soulless red eyes began to stare at all the angry people from the darkness. Footsteps could be heard coming from there as a crowd of creatures, some with shoes and some without, approached them. In fact, they were armed, angry skeletons carrying weapons and heading straight for the crowd of players. Compared to the unfortunate group of players, the skeletons led by men were many times more numerous. When one of the men saw how many creatures had arrived, he was overcome with panic. Our main character was the commander of this group of skeletons, and, as their leader, he was the first to attack the crowd of players. As he ran fiercely, he shouted to the men that he had brought the skeletons here. Suddenly, the young man remembered the trio that had recently made him believe the orcs' lies. The guy realized that these 3 were also to blame for the fight that was happening now, and he swore that they would get what they deserved. At the command of one of the archers, everyone began to attack the boy with arrows and other weapons to finish him off. The boy was always one step ahead, so all the arrows and attacks were useless because he jumped high above them. His skills and abilities were impressive, so the aggressive archers just stood there with their mouths open instead of taking action. In this way, Min covered the distance, leaving his opponents behind, and with a cheerful smile, he waved goodbye to them. This surprised everyone present, who stood almost in silence and held their weapons without attacking. Only now did they realize that the boy had left them to their fate along with a bunch of aggressive skeletons. Now the boy could calmly finish this quest, and he headed towards the shining stone in the pillar. Kneeling before the relic, the boy realized that this time he was in serious trouble. He grabbed the stone with his gloved hand, but the system displayed a strange message that death was seeking him. Immediately after that, his body was overcome with indescribable pain, and he began to shake and contort his face. The poor guy endured the torment with all his strength, and a moment later he fell helplessly to the floor, breathing heavily and continuing to shake. The system informed the boy that he had absorbed pure death energy and could now use elemental attacks. Realizing that the quest was not yet complete, He left the center of the temple with one powerful leap. While he was teleporting to the picturesque city, an error occurred in the system, and he was added to the legendary quest. The boy shot through the air and sky like a blue lightning bolt and headed for the pavement to land. Although he flew towards this place at super speed, he landed quite neatly and unharmed. As soon as he came to his senses, he felt that his whole body was still in great pain. He felt that someone was standing right next to him, watching him, and he turned around in fear to look. There were men in armor standing there, and among them was a man who looked like a samurai with a sword. He lifted the visor of his helmet and said that he was Rotun, the leader of the village guards, and that he had a question for him. The appearance of these guards shocked and surprised the young man, and he only frowned at his request. A little later, they were sitting in a tavern at a table with other armed and armored men. When those present heard that the boy had confirmed his passage through the labyrinth of the dead, the crowd around him exploded with joy. The man explained that this underground labyrinth had been created on the site of a cemetery where the city's inhabitants were buried. Thanks to the boy's actions, the relatives and friends of the city's inhabitants had finally found peace, and they were very grateful to him for that. Yeonmin agreed, although in reality he used the skeletons for his own purposes to stop the RK players. They sat at a wooden table surrounded by wooden barrels, with empty bowls and mugs on the table. Roten asked if he could find out the name of our main character, and the young man replied that his name was Ryan. Amidst incredible applause, shouts, and cheers, they shook hands. The system announced that he had achieved a feat as the hero of the village of Hylos, and in honor of this, he was presented with a gift on a wooden board. It was a signal fire to call the villagers in case of danger, and the boy began to feel shy. Looking at the audience and talking cheerfully, he thought about how the strongest player in the village had a level of 780. This news even motivated the boy, and he decided that he would like to fight him someday. Suddenly, Rotan shouted to the entire room to salute the hero, Minu. In unison, all the men raised their spears and placed them in front of them, forming a corridor. The young man was embarrassed by this sight. The man clarified that he would always be happy to come to the aid of the residents at any time, very quickly. Yeonmin's deed pleased the residents so much that they accompanied the hero with shining eyes, which still made Min nervous. He left the tavern, went out into the courtyard, opened his screen, and decided to organize his inventory, which was very large. Suddenly, a man wearing glasses called out to him, calling him by his game name, Ryan, and the young man turned his attention to him. The young man did not know this man and obviously asked who he was. The man in glasses bowed and apologized for not greeting him yet. He was a scout for the Split Guild. It seemed that our main character was not interested in such offers at all. He waved to him and walked away. The man was not upset and asked him to wait, but the young man remembered that in the sports world, scouts are real egoists and hypocrites. The scout did not lose hope of attracting attention and justified himself by saying that he had been misunderstood. Still, he managed to get at least a little attention and asked if the guy had heard of the Split Guild, which is in the top 100 guilds. When the guy indifferently replied that it was the first time he had heard of this guild, the man became very angry at this answer. This weirdo was very annoying and even scared Yeonmin, who looked at him with distrust. The man went on to explain that his guild was in the top 100 in South Korea, and he hoped they would make it into the top 50. He laughed nervously and explained that in any case, he had found him to invite him to join his guild. The scout sensed that the young man was not interested and began to justify the guild with pleading gestures. The guy refused the offer again, but the persistent scout still asked for a little more attention. He began frantically promoting the guild, saying that they had all the potions and support items, and that it was worth joining because of this. The young man turned and walked away, and the scout begged him to reconsider because then he would not have to pass the test as young men usually do. When the man asked if Min had joined another guild, he replied that he was playing solo. This was a winning phrase, after which the annoying scout fell silent and no longer ran after him with unnecessary persuasion. Wishing the boy luck, he discreetly adjusted his glasses on his nose with his brown-gloved hand and said no more. Later, the guy was in his apartment checking a message from his sister in his messenger app. The boy had already changed into his usual clothes and was sprawled on a soft sofa with his tablet. He remembered the man who was a scout for the guild and invited him to join them. In general, with the support of a large guild, he could develop much faster, but the young man was not interested in that. Remembering the man with glasses again, Yeonmin came to the conclusion that he actually gave off a bad vibe. He thought that this man might not have known his level, but the RC players, on the contrary, might have known. He decided not to worry about this strange situation, although it was indeed very strange. Getting natural buffs, meaning skills that improve combat stats, surprised him even more now. He was also shocked by all the attack items and other improvements that could actually be much more serious. He decided to study the information about obtaining the water elemental as thoroughly as possible as soon as possible. He rejoined the game wearing his virtual game and illuminated by blue pixels. When the locals saw Yeonmin, They were ecstatic because he was not just a player but a real hero. The knowledgeable players did not understand why the secondary characters were so happy for the young man, but the girl said that he was the first to complete the quest in this village. Later, the event moved to a creepy room with training mannequins and very little light. He decided to hone his skills from the book and immediately went on the attack, smashing the dolls. Blue sparks flew under his feet, and ahead of him were more surviving training mannequins. The first mannequin received a kick to the side, which knocked it off the ground. The boy assumed that the mannequin would not fly higher, or perhaps he thought it was attached to the floor. It didn't matter to him, so he continued to destroy the prepared mannequins. This training had no effect because, as he expected, training with a dummy was pointless. He accepted this, but when he saw a dummy in armor and a helmet, he decided that it would be his next victim. Gathering all his strength, he concentrated his power in his hand, summoning an elemental fire attack. Such a powerful spell caused the mannequin's armor to burst and shockwaves to rise around them. The boy stood and looked at the remains, counting the skills he had just improved and what he was now capable of. When he simply touched the mannequin and uttered a word, everything around him flew in different directions and broke into pieces. He was frightened by such power in his hands and began to wave his hand, which was burning with magic. He decided to end his training, thinking that this was enough for now. Looking at his fingers, which had just been filled with magic, he smiled cheerfully and decided to move on. Soon, our main character was standing in a meadow with very green grass and tall trees. The same robbers were already waiting for him, and one of them asked the others to get ready. They were annoyed that the boy had been training for 2 hours and they wanted revenge. They didn't like waiting. The clearing and the grass were empty, and the horizon behind them was glowing orange. There was movement in that direction, although it was not visible. Creatures resembling wolves with weapons were approaching. Yongmin met them from behind, and the creatures in clothes and fur began to walk faster. Catching up with one of the wolf-like creatures, he kicked it in the snout with his foot in his shoe. From the strong blow to the head, the wolf opened its mouth, losing self-control for a moment. Creatures like him, wearing the same clothes and carrying the same weapons, were obviously shocked by this and ran to help. The men watched the battle and could not believe what they were seeing. They clearly needed support. When he saw his comrades, he felt bolder and more confident. The young man stood in the middle of a clearing and tall grass from which the heads of archers and other armed players were already visible. A man with black hair and unusual armor shouted to his comrades to grab the boy. He also yelled for them to kill him and take all his belongings while everyone else was running into battle. When they tried to intimidate the boy, he realized that there were barely more than 50 people there, and he even rejoiced and relaxed. He immediately sprang into action and, raising his hand to the sky, shouted the spell of the fierce bird. A delicate blue crystal in the shape of a bird with wings flew out of his hand. When the crystal reached a decent height, it became clear that this was a spell of massive destruction. The men just stared at the stone. When the spell began to take effect, a hologram of a large pink bird appeared around the crystal, opening its beak wide. This creature began to scream very loudly, causing the group of robbers to cover their ears. When they opened their eyes, they saw the same clearing again, with neither the boy nor the bird. The archers gathered in the middle of the clearing and began to get angry at the escape of their prey. One of the archers was overcome with indescribable horror when a large angry wolf began to run towards him. There were many of them, and they outnumbered and surrounded the confused archers. One of the men shouted aggressively that it was an object that summoned mobs to one point. There was no time for talk because the angry wolf-like creatures had already rushed at the people, leaving wounds. The boy, playing with the bird his sister had given him, realized that it could only scream, but in doing so, it provoked the mobs. One of the cornered players, overcome with fear, fought off the creature with his sword. It was unbearable because there were so many mobs, and behind him, Yeonmin was beating this man's comrades. Another comrade grabbed his staff with a precious stone at the end, understanding the command. Seeing the reaction of the other players, the young man decided to use the invisibility effect. As soon as the men nearby heard this, with a snap of his fingers, the young man disappeared from view. The dark-haired man was furious at the situation that had gotten out of control and ordered his men to use any skills they had. While everyone was listening to their leader's instructions, the boy they wanted so much appeared out of thin air behind them. When the man saw him, he shouted loudly and ordered everyone to catch up with him. Looking at the man with the stick, he remembered his sister's advice to immediately destroy healers, i.e., people like this one. For his actions, he immediately received a blow to the face from our protagonist's red boot. And then, to knock him out, the guy delivered an additional blow to the chin. When Yeonmin ran angrily at the next player, he got scared and asked where the tank was because the cheaters were leaving the game one by one. The red-haired man used a magic staff and created a magic shield with a beautiful ornament, which quickly stopped Min. The guy decided not to give up and punch through these shields. to which the man replied not to waste his strength. The man underestimated the guy because at that very moment one of the shields cracked. The weirdo was shocked by the quick break of the shield, but the guy immediately hit him. The young man inflicted pain on his jaw and cheek, causing his face to become flat on that side. When it finally dawned on these fools that Min was destroying the healers, an order was immediately given to defend them. One bald man with an axe immediately rushed at our main character, but the boy managed to jump high and escape. Immediately in the air, he kicked this unlucky man in the back, causing him to scream and roll his eyes. The bald brute had not even had time to fall to the floor when Yan Min was already attacking the next one. All the archers and other players with various weapons were simply flying from the blows of the enraged guy. Now the men's next idea to save the situation was to tie the boy down somewhere so that he could not escape. The boy understood this and thought that even though there were fewer opponents, it was still not easy to fight. The main character was even having fun, and after shouting a spell of fiery zeal, he doubled all his stats. With his pressure and breakthrough, he forced everyone who stood in his way to spin in the air. Now those who remained nearby, seeing the danger, began to flee in different directions. The guy's acceleration speed was enviable because in 1 second he was already closer to his next victims. Realizing that their opponent's speed was superior to theirs, the men could only curse at him. The black-haired man was confused and gave a new order to hold the enraged boy down with a shield and spear in his hands. Frightened, the man raised his shield, which the young man took advantage of by striking him in the legs. To defeat him once and for all, he shouted that he was going to use a super powerful attack and prepared to strike. He directed a powerful shockwave toward his opponents, which could be seen with the naked eye. This blew the villains away from where they were standing as if by a storm wind. Now, in order to attack successfully, Yan Min spun his fist, aiming for the best place to strike. Focusing on his plan, he said that now he would do everything perfectly. One of the men shouted that there were actually 4 of them and even began to threaten to injure his throat. Meanwhile, the young man jumped up and landed on his knees. The main character ran at high speed and shouted as he rushed forward to attack. Suddenly, the system informed him that all his skills had returned to their initial level, which visibly frightened the young man. And when the system added that all indicators had decreased for an indefinite period of time, the guy was in shock. He also noticed that there were about 40 opponents left, which made him think. The young man realized that it would be difficult for him because he would not be able to cope on his own, as there were many mages and healers here. Accepting his inevitable negative fate in the game, he stopped when he noticed a man ahead of him. For him, it was a sign that all the boosts and stats were over, and it was even a good sign for him. His evil and empty eyes stared at him, and he said that even though he was skilled, they would not pity him. He added that he would not be lucky because this was not the city where he could fight alone without the support of guilds. The young man realized that this scoundrel was definitely connected to the Split Guild and mentally praised him for letting it slip. However, our main character was not going to give up so easily and was already rubbing his fists. Above the heads of the opponents, colorful fireworks flashed, which everyone eagerly watched. The man reacted skeptically to this signal rocket because he believed that no one would go against them. Immediately after the signal flare, the command to open fire was given, and the archers began to draw their bows. Dozens of arrows flew from all possible directions at the boy, who was still standing in place and not moving. A moment ago, this place was intact, and now clouds of smoke, fragments of trees, branches, and arrows rose above it. The dark-haired man was already celebrating his victory and future promotion because it seemed to him that everything was going smoothly. When the smoke slowly cleared, human legs covered with round shields appeared behind him. The man's face contorted with surprise, and he looked at what was happening with disbelief. In front of him stood a whole mountain of shields held by people defending themselves from the arrows that were already sticking out of the wooden surface. In a moment, their owners appeared from behind the shields, their red pupils glowing in the eye holes. The Avengers had arrived. Now the joy of victory and promotion had vanished like smoke in the air, and the man fearfully held out his hand in shock. Rotun, who had a scar on his nose, showed his face and asked Hostile who dared to touch the hero of their village. Our main character triumphed, and the system informed the robbers that the average level of the Avengers present was 80. It was a fatal situation because the average level of these scoundrels was less than 70, and they were in trouble. After a while, the leader of these fools stood in the forest and actively justified himself to the man in the cloak. He said that the guy was crazy and too strong, and that this whole idea was not his mistake. The scout from Split was talking to him. He was very annoyed by the excuses and threatened not to promote him. The leader wanted to promise that he would catch him next time, but the scout said that the guild would catch him when the guy reached level 70. The scout explained that the level restrictions would disappear, and then it would be possible to engage in RC with impunity. Our main character listened to this nasty dialogue and came to the conclusion that at first the scout was calling out to the guild, but now he wanted to finish him off. The scoundrels quickly realized that Yan Min had heard their conversation and were afraid that he had used Invis. In fact, the young man used the sounds of nature, and a small, beautiful fairy helped him. The scout even began to sweat with emotion and, gritting his teeth, asked what the boy had heard from the conversation. The young man willingly began the conversation and, raising his finger to his face, began to think about what to answer. He showed them a parody of the conversation he had heard, and it was obvious that he had been there from the very beginning of the dialogue. The men became even more irritated because they realized that he had indeed used the invisibility cloak to eavesdrop on their conversation. Trying to save the situation, the scout asked the young man what he wanted from them, frowning above his glasses. Youngman found this funny because he replied that they definitely didn't have what he needed. The scout's aggression was so intense that the glass in his glasses cracked. He thought that since he was a newcomer, he would be satisfied with just new clothes. The boy responded to the scout's heated reaction by saying that thanks to some people, he had plenty of supplies. When the guy hinted at YouTube and that he would talk about Split there, the scout became visibly frightened. Suddenly, the system shared that the guy had gained access to the guild's equipment and third-rank items, and he was beaming with happiness. Having received what he wanted, the boy warned that if the men broke their promise, they would have to live with it themselves. The scout looked very upset. After the victorious dialogue, he decided to return to the village, which was bathed in sunlight and tranquility. There he met an old grandfather who, upon seeing the hero, wished him to fulfill the desires of all his ancestors. The boy immediately decided to check if this was a quest, and the system confirmed that he had to continue the legacy of Halos Bunny. At first, he did not understand anything because the village had the same name, and he had heard about the 10 heroes of this place. These 10 heroes were the people who, in the distant past, defeated the demons and brought peace to this land. The first was the founding king, Chiron, with a beard and a handsome physique, and the second was the paladin, Leonold. Next was the green-haired archer, Lowena, with arrows burning with blue fire, and the fourth hero was named Saint with light hair. The fifth hero was the mage Argent, with a huge green hat and a long gray beard, and the seventh was the burly and fierce Bagdal. The seventh hero was Lena, the lightning knight with long red hair, and Eladin, the elementalist of harmony with strong armor. The ninth was the conscript, holding a magic book in his hands with creatures around him that he skillfully summoned into this world. And the 10th hero was the mighty Halos, in whose honor this picturesque village was named. The boy did not understand why such characters with such levels appeared here, and he asked his grandfather what he should do. The old man smiled warmly, asked him to listen, and promised to show him everything. Later, they walked along the path, and the old man asked if the boy knew about Hylos, to which he replied discontentedly and indifferently that he did. The old man pointed to the statue of Hylos and explained that he was one of the 10 heroes who watched over their village. The old man explained that Hylos had told his ancestors that a worthy successor would appear to continue his legacy and, as a reward for fulfilling his request, would receive power. The man looked at him with his eyes and said that our Ryan deserves to receive the power of one of these heroes. Then he handed him a shining blue-green gemstone and asked the boy to take it. The young man obediently took the stone and hid it in the inside pocket of his clothes, and the old man showed him the direction in which he should go. Our main character had been walking along the indicated route for more than 5 minutes, but nothing was happening, and he was feeling irritated. At that moment, as if on cue, the precious shining stone glowed and revealed itself from behind his clothes. The system suggested that the stone had helped him open the cave of trials that appeared before him. When the stone slowly flew out of his pocket, the system added that Min would not be able to leave the cave until he passed the trial or refused to take it. The system also warned that after refusal, the quest could not be repeated, and the boy understood that the map was inaccessible. The stopwatch showed 48 seconds as all kinds of sharp, dangerous weapons flew at the boy, filling him with unspeakable horror. Now it showed 29 seconds, and the guy understood that he urgently needed to get out of this terrible place. Now it was 21 seconds, and the guy had just barely avoided being injured by a giant blade, and he began to have doubts. The number 17 was colored orange, and the boy slid, trying to get out in time. One crazy moment on the dial, 3 seconds, and the boy in the carriage doesn't even understand if he made it. The system showed 0 seconds, and the wall that had been descending closed, sending pieces of stone flying off it from the impact. The system congratulated the guy on passing the second stage of the test, as he lay tired and irritated on the bricks. The first stage of the test was too intense and difficult, and the guy cursed this crazy Hylos for the emotions he had experienced. Next, he learned step by step how to walk on water, and in what sequence to move his feet correctly when moving on it. Then the second step was timing, where he had to learn to understand when the traps would be triggered. When our main character realized that Hylos had set traps everywhere, he became even more irritated by his actions. He began to brush the dust and dirt off his clothes and swore that when he met this fool, he would definitely punish him. He decided to leave, but suddenly saw an incredibly beautiful temple shining with golden rays of sunlight. Opposite the large decorated windows stood 3 statues on pedestals of 10 heroes. There was a warning that the boy had to hold out here for the next 10 minutes. And behind the statues, they began to move treacherously. One of them took his giant sword, swung it, and struck the stone floor of the temple with all his might. The boy was surprised by the speed of the statue and realized that if it hit him, there would be nothing left of him. He tried to concentrate and dodge the large chunks of stone flying around him. The statue tried to grab him with its stone hand, but the boy deftly jumped high above it. Immediately, he climbed higher and tried to kick the stone creature in the chin as usual. This blow did not harm the statue at all because it was made of stone, so the boy decided to try to destroy it in another way. Looking back, he saw a statue of a man with long hair and armor and a large scary mace. The system reported that the second stone statue with a mace was beginning to wake up. These statues woke up as quickly as they moved, so the mace of the second statue had already landed at the boy's feet. The realization of the danger of the situation frightened Mina. If the other statues woke up, it would be the end for him. He was unsure of what to do, but after shouting the word explosion, he directed blue lightning bolts around him. Right now, he had to hide somewhere out of sight of the statues, so he jumped over the railing of the stairs. The statues ran and swung their dangerous stone weapons, one with a sword and the other with a mace. The boy shouted the word explosion again and directed lightning at the stone creatures, scattering their weapons. Now the boy could rejoice because he was able to damage them in this way. Blows did not work on them, but the explosion was effective. He looked toward the window again and realized that there were still 7 statues left. The battle was not over yet. When he looked at the statue of Lowena, the system reported that she had awakened. She was the third. The statue was firing arrows from her bow, and the boy had to jump and dodge them quickly and without stopping. The figure quickly pulled an arrow from its quiver, drew the bowstring, and aimed at the boy. When the young man saw that this statue was an archer, he rejoiced and said that this would play into his hands. Some time passed, and our main character was sitting in the center of the temple on a pile of statues that had been pierced by arrows. The system sent a message that Ryan had reached level 70, although he didn't even have level 60, and he admitted that it wasn't easy. He received the achievement of a hero slayer, from whom even powerful creatures would fear him, while he continued down the corridor. When a door appeared in front of him, he opened it very carefully and slowly, and looked out to see what was behind it. As he stood there, he thought carefully about what awaited him if he passed the final test. He left his hiding place and entered the door, thinking that he was tired of everything. Amidst the torches and dark stone walls stood a statue of Hylos, separated from the other statues in another room. When the boy looked at the statue's face, he noticed an incomprehensible movement, which made him flinch and look at it with distrust. This statue also came to life and, moving abruptly, the figure of Hylos swung and almost hit the boy with his fist. When Ryan realized that the same battle was repeating itself, he cursed and became very angry at the repetition of the difficult battle. As the boy swung his fists, he noticed that the statue knelt on one knee and handed him a red gem instead of fighting. It looked like the one his grandfather had given him, but it was a wind crest that allowed him to use the power of the wind. A weak player could not use this fragment because everything could get out of control, but the young man wanted to try. He took the fragment of the wind emblem in his hands and shouted to activate it and saw it glow in his palms. As expected, the system considered his body unprepared, and he was generally weak, so the young man was spun around by the raging wind. Without losing hope, he rushed towards the stone, and blue lightning bolts shot out of his hands from his desire. Now everything worked out for him. He received the power of the wind, and Ryan was happy about this. His red gloves were smoking slightly, and he had just received the seal of the wind thanks to natural amplification. The boy's face was satisfied. Now the system congratulated him on the enhancement of his characteristics. The boy was happy that he was becoming faster. In addition, the system reported that he was stronger than Halo, which surprised Ryan, and suddenly wings appeared above his head in a blue glow. He grabbed them with his hand, guessing that this could be a reward for his efforts. It was a sign of Talaria. It could be worn on shoes, and the wings gave greater agility and double jump. He soared into the blue sky and clouds like a rocket thanks to these wings on his boots. While flying in the sky, he decided that he would need this thing and skillfully landed back on the ground. Realizing his powerful position, he decided that if he met Hylos, he would give him a piece of his mind, even though he might be a good guy. The boy returned to the Fighters Guild and was already standing at the counter with a book, talking to the man opposite him. The man asked what skills he had been able to unlock, and the boy shared his achievements with him and familiarized himself with the text. Realizing that most of the skills were meaningless, he turned around and left, and the man waved goodbye and said farewell. He remembered the book that the goddess of war had given him and decided to read it again in more detail. The whirlwind technique was a jump and kick that struck nearby enemies and took away 250% of their attack power. The attacking stance allowed him to take a more advantageous position for attack and increase damage by 10%. The defensive stance allowed him to take a no less advantageous position for defense and increased his armor by 10%. Reading the book, the guy realized that he had seen all this somewhere before, remembering the goddess of war. Later, the boy sat on the sofa in his apartment, holding his phone in his hand and talking to someone. On the other end of the line, Rachel was surprised by her brother's progress and asked how he was able to do it so quickly. He replied that he was just completing quests and destroying other players, and the girl was simply fascinated by this. After listening to her brother's adventures, the girl told him to move on to a new zone in any case. She promised to level him up when she returned to Korea. The young man didn't understand how she would do that, but she asked him to trust her and asked about party quests. The guy didn't like it because he liked to play solo. The girl laughed, and they began to say goodbye while he was sitting at the computer. They wished each other sweet dreams. It was strange for the girl that her brother was so into the game. Her surprise and excitement immediately turned to joy because she was happy for her brother. Meanwhile, Yeonmin was busy searching for information about the 10 heroes he had recently encountered. The internet told him that in the final saga, these characters were the descendants of heroes who had completed quests and reached the top of the rankings. Currently, only 4 characters were active: the Paladin, the Holy Elementalist, and the Conscript, but only the Paladin and the Holy were the most active. The guy remembered that he had cancelled the development branch of the Thief Halos and regretted not choosing a fighter, but this class could exist. Then he decided to search for information on Musin's request, but the search engine did not provide enough information. The guy rejoined the game and now had to find a group before searching for adventures. He was interested in healers. The guy hoped that this was not a party quest and thought that he could go further on his own without a group of players. He bypassed the people and entered the dungeon, deciding that no one could interfere with him here and that there was nothing to worry about. Almost immediately at the entrance, an orc with red eyes appeared in front of him. Without waiting for the monster to act, he immediately spun around and kicked it in the face. When the blow was over, the boy immediately felt that this creature was somehow different from the previous orcs. He was surprised that the creature was unable to dodge the blow but still reacted to the attack. His guess was correct because when he looked at what was happening to the creature, he realized that everything was different. The system sent a message about passing through the tunnel, but the boy did not like the rewards. They were weak. As the boy looked indifferently at his surroundings, nearby, the initial players fled in panic and horror from another angry orc. Our main character found himself in the city of Photon and went to a fair where fish and other meat were sold. The boy looked around and realized that due to the lack of level restrictions, the player's equipment differed significantly. He decided to start a quest and was looking for partners when he was greeted by a man from the Adventurers Guild. Our main character, who had come here, told this man that he wanted to start a quest. The man immediately suspected something and asked if the boy was here for the first time in their guild, to which the young man replied that he was. When he heard the positive answer, he took out a roll of paper from his hiding place and said that it should suit him. Our main character looked at the man with a little distrust and looked at what he had given him. He had to find friends and clear the dungeon together. First, he looked at the girl who was also looking for a shield bearer for the Dungeon of the Cursed Skulls. Another man nearby shouted just as loudly that he was looking for a level 90 healer and was willing to go anywhere with him. On the other side stood a man with a mohawk, a mask, and a bandage on his face, who was looking for a mage to go on a trip to the steep slopes. None of these offers suited Ryan because none of the people present needed a damage dealer like him. On the other side, he heard a girl with a sword and light hair shouting that she needed anyone without specifying any conditions. This offer suited the young man perfectly, so he told the girl that he would like to join them. And she looked at him. When she saw who had approached her, her mood and expression changed dramatically, and her face darkened. She quickly turned away and explained her reaction by saying that she realized he was a damager. She turned back to her original position and began calling on players to join her again, while the young man realized that things were not so simple. As Ryan was walking away, an unusual girl in a hat with blue hair called out to him and asked if he wanted to join them. He immediately admitted to her that he was a fighter, but she asked if he had the Flower of Adventure quest, and explained that it was quite complicated. She added that she and her friends didn't have much time, but if he was interested, they could help him with the quest. Our main character looked at her face and felt a little embarrassed, but he thanked the girl uncertainly. The guy didn't think twice and extended his hand to the man in the leopard coat and agreed to join them. Suddenly, thanks to the system, he learned that this detachment was private, and he was upset because it meant that he could not reveal his identity. The girl in the hat immediately told him to go and said that they knew the area, and everything would be over very quickly. They walked in a group near a beautiful picturesque building, and the guy decided that it was not necessary to know each other's names for such a short meeting. The system showed that they had entered the Dungeon of Trials, so the guy got a little annoyed and wanted to ask something. Suddenly, at that very moment, scary monsters resembling goblins with red eyes ran out. The boy did not lose his composure at all, and compared the trials in the village of Hylos with these monsters, and decided that it was all trivial. The girl in the hat stopped him and told him to stop because they would take care of everything. The boy hesitantly agreed again, and became visibly agitated because he felt uncomfortable accepting help. The man in the leopard coat also had red eyes from rage as he struck the monsters with his sword. The girl in the hat defended herself with her spells, which decorated her hands with beautiful patterns and circles. The third member of the squad was an archer, and, without wasting any time, shot his arrows at the monsters. As they attacked, items rained down on the floor thanks to the battle and the defeated monsters. While his colleagues were collecting the acquired items and rewards into a bag, the boy realized that things and experience were obtained separately. Our main character was somewhat frightened by the evil gaze of the man in the fur coat, and he looked back at him awkwardly. The man put on a fake smile and asked him if they could continue. Then the same man opened a large door that hid darkness and uncertainty behind it, and they all went on together. Suddenly, behind these doors, they were met by a large carved stone pillar with a purple stone on top. Everyone present stared spellbound at the unknown precious stone and remained silent for the time being. One of the group said that it was worth breaking the crystal to clear the dungeon, and that there was a shield that would prevent it from being broken by projectiles. The archer in the green jacket began to shoot his arrows at the purple crystal. As the man in the leopard coat had said, the pillar was protected by a magical blue shield that prevented both shells and arrows from reaching it. Our main character approached this jade-colored pillar and realized that the walls were smooth and it would be very difficult to climb up there. When the man heard this, he raised his eyebrows suspiciously and said that no one had ever passed through this dungeon because of this. The guy was very surprised and confused because they had recently told him that they had cleared this dungeon more than once. The man in the leopard coat added that if you touch the crystal, you won't be able to get out of here, and immediately, living skeletons of the 90th level appeared. The young man was angered by what he saw and assumed that all the defeated and destroyed monsters had been resurrected. With a suspicious look on his face, the man showed a scroll and explained that you couldn't get out of here with a regular one. You needed a special one. He began to openly mock the boy when the teleportation scroll was activated because the young man did not have one. Our main character realized that this scroll appeared because they had defeated the monsters in the dungeon on their own. The girl with the hat joined in on the treacherous scheme, tore up the teleportation scroll, wished him luck, and disappeared. There were many skeletons, and the most disgusting thing was that he was left here alone. Our main character himself did not understand how he could have fallen into such a treacherous trap against him. Finally realizing what had happened, he gritted his teeth and promised that the next time they met, these fools would regret ever being born. He immediately turned on his cold mind and decided to first assess the situation. He remembered that one of the passages was blocked by this evil. Thinking further about his actions, he looked at the tall pillar with the crystal. The guy looked very thoughtful, and he assumed that at such a height, an explosion could be quite effective. Suddenly, he remembered something and stamped his feet on the floor, causing a fierce fire to form around him. Ryan raised his hand and shouted at the top of his lungs, looking at the pillar so that it would explode. His hand was aimed at the stone and was just a little bit away from reaching it and grabbing it. To get closer to his goal, he defied the laws of gravity and jumped up the wall, which was quite smooth. After making numerous jumps, he was able to jump even higher than the crystal itself, and now he was heading towards it. He took it in his hands. The purple glow was incredible, shimmering like a pile of diamonds. Suddenly, as he sat near the pedestal where the crystal lay, he heard a strange sound and immediately became angry. Behind one of the corners, all three of them were laughing hysterically at Ryan's appearance and facial expression, leaving him to fend for himself. They found it very funny how they had treated the boy and the expression on his face when they left him. Now it was their turn to be afraid and shocked because there was an explosion in their hiding place that broke the stone walls and pillars. The loud noise made the scoundrels jump up and down and scream in fear. They all hid in the room, but the destruction did not end there. The entire building, with its ancient architecture, began to collapse like a house of cards. While the building was collapsing below, acrid dust flew up to the sky, and Ryan sat on a whole jade pillar, unharmed and unscathed. He exhaled and realized that if it weren't for his protective shield, there would be nothing left of him. He was still holding the purple crystal in his hands and watching as it began to dissipate like morning fog and mix with the air. The system explained that the boy had just received pure life energy and could now use the healing skill. It was a little strange for the boy because, in order to heal himself, he had to hit his opponent. After reading the instructions from the system, he jumped off a tall pole, deciding that this healing skill would be useful to him. When the boy had already left this place, 2 heroes from the dozens came to the ruins. Among them was a saint and another woman. This woman's name was Esna, and she was a descendant of the saint Ranker. She was overwhelmed with emotion because only a saint could handle such an item. Her tears immediately turned into unspeakable rage because someone dared to steal someone else's skill, that is, the crystal, and she punched the pole with all her might. The man said he would send a request to the informants to find the person who took the saint's skill, although the thief could be found in the nearest villages or in the forest. Meanwhile, our Ryan was standing on the shore of a large reservoir with a wooden boat and many green trees. He was studying something on the screen. He read the conditions of the quest about the 5 misfortunes that threatened the city of Photon and was already unhappy. He read on and realized that a transparent lake awaited him. He hoped that this time it would be more interesting. Now he looked into the blue water and was dissatisfied because the spirit of the lake did not appear in it. Suddenly the water began to stir, and a voice came from it, saying that the offender who polluted the lake would be punished. A mermaid dressed in a blue dress appeared from the water in front of our main character. She looked quite angry and stared at the young man. Now the boy was satisfied because he was standing before the real spirit and master of the lake, whom he had been waiting for so long. His eyes immediately began to analyze what he saw with their multicolored lenses. Then he immediately attacked the mermaid, but his fist passed right through her, and the blow was ineffective, which was evident on the young man's face. Then his eyes, with their unusual abilities, saw her weak spot and where his desired target was. Her neck. He immediately swung his arm in a quick motion and grabbed the area indicated by the system. From the mermaid's neck, he pulled out an unusual blue sphere made of symmetrical wires. Without hesitation, he squeezed it with all his might in his fist, and splashes of blue water appeared near his hand. The boy looked at his hand, which glowed blue, and was proud of himself because he had managed to do it. 2 of the 5 misfortunes had been destroyed. As a reward for passing the test, a gold ring with a blue stone appeared in Ryan's hand. When he read in the message from the system that thanks to him he could breathe underwater, he was quite happy. He didn't immediately believe this information, but he still approached the shore of the lake where the water was splashing. He decided that he had nothing to lose from this gift, so he immediately dove into the depths of this mysterious lake. The boy was immediately enveloped by dark blue water and rapidly descended into the dark depths of the lake, which obviously hid something. When he looked more closely at the bottom, he saw a large building with a beautiful roof and light-colored decoration, which surprised him. The system suggested that the boy had just found the ruined temple of Lake Ryan and swam a little closer to the porch. The ring on his finger glowed in the darkness of the depths, and the boy realized that the temple had been here at the bottom all along. When he entered the depths of the ruined temple, he realized that a large air bubble had formed there. When he went a little further, he earned the title of explorer because he had found this temple, and no one had found it before Ryan. He came out onto a large staircase, and at the top he found a crown of purification that could save him from all abnormal conditions. The guy picked it up, wondering where he could wear this epic piece of jewelry. Only now did it dawn on the boy that this ornament was only 1 level below legendary. As soon as he put it on his head, everything around him plunged into impenetrable darkness. He did not understand what was happening. It must have been a mistake. But behind him he saw a girl with golden hair. This girl showed him an illusion, telling him a story about how they had prospered and ruled in this place in the past. The girl wore this crown during the story and said that every day they had peace, and hoped that it would always be so. The boy, holding the same crown, realized that the girl was its true owner and listened attentively. Unfortunately, peace was not destined to remain in this area, as a terrible disaster occurred. The girl added that they called it a disaster, something that seemed safe at first glance, but this misfortune engulfed the village in one fell swoop. Even those who managed to survive were cursed because their skin rotted and sank before their eyes. Being one of the survivors of this disaster was not a joyful thing. People suffered and agonized while still alive. Those residents who perished in this disaster could not find peace even after death. The situation was too horrific. Those who resisted tried with all their might, but nothing worked, and they barely managed to cope with everything with the help of purification. The only thing that could save people from misfortune was the power of purification of the crown, but without its owner, it was useless. Since the owner of the crown of purification had been brutally taken away, certain people who could take responsibility for this found a new owner for it. Having found a new place for the relic, the person asked it to show mercy to the weak, cleanse them of the remnants of the disaster, and free them from pain. After listening carefully to the whole tragic story about the unfortunate events of the city, the guy understood what had really happened. He looked at the screen and realized that the spirit of the lake had been counted, and there were still a few consequences of the disaster that he had to eliminate. A real quest chronicle awaited him, and the young man understood that it would be quite difficult, but there was no point in turning back now. He looked into the distance with determination and enthusiasm because he intended to cope with this difficult task. Suddenly, the boy felt that his feelings had changed somewhat, and he realized that this was due to the fact that he was now experiencing déjà vu. The strange feelings turned into panic and fear. The air bubble burst, and water flooded the temple. The boy was so frightened that he screamed too loudly and immediately tore up the teleportation scroll to escape from this place and save himself. In a moment, our main character was sitting under the blue sky, safe and happy that he had managed to escape. Suddenly, a cry rang out from somewhere that the screaming lord had returned and support was needed. The boy decided to hurry to complete the quest. Near the players was a giant monster with a goat's head, wearing powerful armor and wielding a hammer. This creature was evil and terrifying. The players who were trying to defeat it were visibly nervous and even considered running away. They suspected that the creature was up to something. Suddenly, the demonic monster opened its mouth and began to growl frantically with lightning flashing from its eyes. It was the effect of a death cry, and everyone fell into a state of fear. People who fell under this effect simply went mad, covering their eyes and ears with their hands, unable to save themselves. The other men who were holding their weapons were pushed by something, and they looked back at the one who had done it, recovering from the shock. Ryan quickly ran to help with the attack, already wanting to start fighting the terrible creature. He dodged the hammer and other attacks from the goat-like monster, and his eyes began to glow red with rage. In an instant, when the boy managed to fly a little closer, he took advantage of this and quickly knocked the giant hammer out of the monster's hand. His blow was powerful because the hammer immediately began to spin in flight, leaving its owner. The hammer acted like a boomerang and treacherously struck its owner when it returned to him. The players standing nearby were shocked. The monster was destroyed, engulfed by an aura of death. Thus, Ryan was able to complete part of the quest and destroy one of the evils of the city of Photon. All the players present were impressed by the actions of our main character, who was able to knock the screaming lord off his feet with a single blow. The guy clenched his fist with satisfaction and rejoiced that the instant effect had just worked, lifting his spirits. Suddenly, a green cloth decorated with beautiful gold thread and jewels fell on him. The boy carefully picked up the fabric and looked around, not understanding where it had come from. Maybe it had fallen off the boss. Suddenly, one of the crowd of players began to shout in fear that the cloak of mourning had just fallen. The whole crowd went crazy and tried to take it away from Ryan. As it turned out, the item was valuable, and with every second, the screams became louder. It was unclear what value this item had, but the men were going crazy over it because they had wanted it for a long time. Our main character yelled at the players, calling them fools and asked them to get out of his way. The crowd ordered the other players to kill the boy, and they prepared their swords and spears for the attack. The boy told the crowd that none of them valued their precious lives, but the enraged crowd did not want to listen to him at all. For Ryan, the course of events was clear. He had to take the cloak of mourning for himself. He put the cloak on himself like a scarf and shouted the spell of the dead, summoning black souls. Now our main character possessed the skill of the Screaming Lord, and the clumsy players suffered a second time from the status of abnormal fear. He, of course, left that terrible place and now stood near the castle, realizing that he had two disasters left. One type of disaster appeared in a certain area, and now a skunk was staring at the guy from the ground. Remembering the goat-like monster, the guy continued to think that the other disaster would appear on its own. Analyzing his previous adventures, the guy understood that although everything was fine with the giant of destruction, next time everything could be different. The boy thought about whether he should go after someone he could catch on his own right now. That suspicious skunk was a poisonous strangler, a monster that released poison into the air. The poison of this seemingly carefree creature might not seem that dangerous, but it was way worse than it looked. The poison of this skunk was so powerful that there were no cheap antidotes, and the magic of the priest was useless. Another reason why the skunk was difficult to hunt was the high risk involved. It simply walked around, poisoning the environment and reacting to nothing. This creature successfully concealed its presence and did not show itself when the player's level was high, or there were many of them. Although the animal was quite small, even for two players, finishing it off was still a challenge. Ryan decided to try to do it. There were rustling and other sounds among the bushes, and a skunk came out, seeing its favorite nuts. But they were colored orange. Whoever had placed the nuts as bait had accurately guessed the animal's preferences. Because the skunk stood transfixed in an instant, the animal immediately ran up to the pile of treats and began to eat the desired nut with great pleasure and desire. Just then, our main character appeared and, without hesitation, mounted the dangerous animal by jumping on its back. Whatever Ryan had thought about this animal before, he was now even more shocked by its strength. The skunk ran frantically and had no intention of stopping, but the boy couldn't hold on and began to fall, noticing that there was poisonous gas around him. Our main character fell on his back and did not get up from the ground, and in front of him stood this skunk, which, as it turned out, was not so small. When the creature came closer, the boy lay on his stomach and pretended to be asleep or unconscious. Unexpectedly, the gas had no effect on Ryan because he had a purification crown, which he now decided to use. The gas had a negative effect on living plants, but with the boy's help, they were cleansed of the poison. And now that he was feeling fine and the environment had been saved, The skunk flew away into the sky from the powerful blow. The boy thanked the purification crown and was glad that now he only had one disaster left to overcome. The defeated skunk lay unconscious nearby, and the poison began to slowly dissipate around him. As a result of losing its poison, the creature became more adequate and smaller in size. The boy did not like this very much because this dangerous creature still existed, albeit small. The skunk gave a silent response to his dissatisfaction, leaving a strange purple sphere in its feces. The boy was shocked by the creature's actions, which simply did not want to give up its treasure to anyone. Overcoming his disgust, he carefully picked up the sphere with his fingers and lifted it from the ground. It was a core filled with poison. The instructions from the system said that he had to use it, and the boy was furious because he had no other choice. He was disgusted by what had contaminated the core a moment ago, but he ate it anyway. After swallowing the core, he realized that, surprisingly, it wasn't so disgusting and even tasted like mint, and it also gave him 10% resistance to poison. Leaving behind thoughts of the skunk and the candy, the guy realized that he still had one more boss left, who would appear at an unknown time. It was the last of the 5 disasters, named Giant Ruin, and this character was many times stronger than the Screaming Lord. The boy realized that now he needed to level up to level 100 and spend his free time training for this. The boy did not give up, and was already at level 88 thanks to his sister's strategies. He could easily feel how much stronger and more powerful he had become by clenching his fists and muscles. He could feel it physically. Although he was proud of himself, he was not at all ready to face the warrior deity, hinting at the red-haired goddess of war. Instead of such radical opponents, he could compete with other ranked players, which was no less interesting and exciting. He was torn from his pleasant thoughts and memories by a cry about the appearance of the Giant of Ruins and the need for reinforcements on the plains of Vulbarin. The boy reacted instantly and shouted the word card, commanding it to enlarge. Then he sprinted and ran straight into it. The crowd of players was angry because they couldn't come any further and couldn't understand anything at all. One man in a helmet told everyone to just move away, and if they really wanted to pass, they should join the guild. The boy was also among the people who couldn't get through and couldn't understand what was going on with these guards. He was very tense and asked what they should do if the others took everything for themselves. Another person joined the conversation by calling the guard a scumbag. Our main character apologized, and the man with the eye patch said that the guild had monopolized the territory. If you attack, you could become a criminal, and if you pass, security and problems will await you. When the men around him grumbled discontentedly about finding the right moment to attack and that it was impossible, the guy thought about it. The guard couldn't stand the grumbling and threatened that if they continued to complain, he would reveal their identities because they had no right to interfere. The bravest of those present was our main character, who boldly approached the guards. It was even daring. The guards began to get angry, one threatening with his fists, and the other calming him down because if they attacked, there would be problems. The man with the blue eye patch was surprised by Ryan's actions and assumed that he just wanted to pass. Another player was even indignant and said with confidence that this newcomer would definitely leave the game. Suddenly, the inattentive guys from the crowd noticed that the guy was wearing a cloak of mourning. The main character, with a cold gaze, uttered a spell of mournful souls, and the guards were afflicted with a state of abnormal fear. All the guilty and innocent suffered from unspeakable horror. All the faces of those present were painted with grimaces of pain and fear. Everyone covered their eyes and ears with their palms. While the others were suffering from the spell, a tall man in armor with a large sword in his hands approached our main character. When he tried to strike the boy with his sword, Ryan again skillfully managed to dodge possible injuries and wounds. The appearance of this mysterious knight with a sword somewhat irritated the boy, causing him to look at him with a cold gaze. Pulling himself together and approaching his new opponent, he managed to reach his helmet with his fist, leaving a dent. The boy possessed a deadly blow and was able to defeat the knight with just one kick, causing a multitude of valuable items to fall from him. Taking the unusual shining blade, the boy smiled slyly and said that it would come in handy. Later, Ryan was walking through the streets of the city when he was noticed by 2 guards, one holding a sword and the other holding a bow. The guard with the sword began to laugh and said that he thought the boy had run out of skills. The other guard quickly took his bow and shot hundreds of arrows at the boy, who did not even suspect it. In fact, the boy was already on guard. To him, these 2 were weak, and their behavior was very predictable. Dodging the arrows, he was able to knock down all the dangerous miniature spears launched by the guard with a triple strike. Then another guard went on the attack, already holding his sword and aiming it at the young man. Arrows pierced the air and the space around the boy, but he was lucky, and none of them could hit him. The guard with the bow and arrows was so displeased with the young man's attitude toward his friend that he decided to take immediate revenge. Our main character realized that he was so valuable that he decided to immediately return the favor with a slightly unsuccessful head-to-head method. Clenching his fist and feeling his strength, the young man boldly asked who was next. The The rest of the guards were frightened because if their colleagues had failed, then they were also powerless. A rather large gray-haired man with a huge hammer in his hands approached all the guards and other players present. When he raised his weapon high above the people, one of the guards, like a small child, raised his finger, pointing to the danger. The hammer struck the ground violently and loudly, scattering people, broken weapons, and stones with its shockwave. Meanwhile, the main character understood from the movements of the Giant of Ruins that he was in the second phase, depending on his remaining health. If he were in the first phase now, he would be swinging his hammer quite widely. The giant was raging, and the boy thought about the important third phase that would come at 10% health, when even the shield bearers would be powerless. Meanwhile, the mad giant of ruin did not stop and began to swing his hammer above his head as if it were a toy. The boy looked at him and realized that he had to understand the movements and the principle of aggro in order to have time to rest. Opening his screen, he came to the conclusion that this big guy was between 11 and 49% health. The boy realized that with little investment in battle items, he would not get anything, so he had to destroy those who would invest the most. There were two men near the bushes, one of whom was frightened and complained that he had goosebumps, while the other was annoyed by this. When the young man decided on his strategy, he moved toward the side of the building where the two armed men were standing. One of them, seeing Ryan, told his partner to deal with the farmer while he dealt with the young man. When the young man saw the spear in the guard's hands, he decided it was a good weapon and wanted to try it out. Snapping his fingers, he caused a bright flash, causing the man to miss. Performing a somersault, he dodged 3 spears, which explained why they all had poor control. They were not aiming at weak spots. When the man once again failed to harm the boy, he became even more irritated by his failure. The boy immediately cheered him up with a generous gift of a kick to the neck. The other man was furious and ran with his spear to avenge his colleague, using abusive language along the way. And then Ryan shared a generous gift of an extraordinary slap with his red boot. The guy said that these people who control the hunting grounds must disappear so that he can enter the game with dignity. The last thing the guard saw before losing consciousness and his mind was the black glove of the brave stranger. Our main character won, and now he could calmly take all the items he deserved into his bag. The tall Gothic building that rose far into the dark sky was engulfed in relentless fire. The reason was the Giant of Ruin, who began to rage frantically. The men shouted that the chief shield bearer had been sent to the other world. Meanwhile, the young man picked up a massive spear with decorations, thinking that he had not used one in battle for a long time. The choice of weapon was final, and our main character was already rushing towards the giant over the heads of the guards. Although the situation could have been better, for Ryan, it was a reason to have fun, getting too close to the giant. The boy smashed and tore his clothes and weapons with his spear, causing the giant ruin's eyes to burn with fire. There was no violent response to such an act. A wave of euphoria and nirvana overwhelmed him, and he was overcome with a feeling of freshness. As it turned out, Ryan had used elemental healing on the giant, and the angry giant felt relief. Now the boy asked for a favor in return for the healing. The giant had to deal with the annoying little players. The giant ruin obediently listened to the boy's request and immediately agreed. All the men who had been confident before were now screaming in horror. The giant's cry simply swept away everything in its path. People flew like leaves. The building slowly collapsed, and everyone's strength to fight was exhausted. For the players, it was the end, and a fatal one at that. All the key players had been destroyed. Something had to be done. Meanwhile, the main character triumphed. The Giant of Ruin lived up to his name. The boy sat on his shoulder, holding a spear engulfed in lightning. It was all very pleasant to watch, but the boy decided that it was time for the finale. He summoned an elemental attack of death and stabbed the giant with his spear, after which he began to be engulfed by an aura of death. The boy jumped off the giant's shoulder and waited patiently for the result of the spear attack. As soon as the Giant of Ruin gave up his soul to the Lord, the system congratulated Ryan on completing the quest of the 5 misfortunes. When the boy saw the message that the quest to clean up the disasters had been added to the quest for fragments of misfortune, he was quite surprised. Someone opened the history of the epidemic disaster, and the sky immediately became ominous and black. This caused a repeat of all the events of the past, and people began to feel sick and look noticeably tired. Our main character had to destroy the epidemic and save the city of Photon, otherwise a wave of disease would fall upon the world. Esna and Saint experienced these conditions and events firsthand as they gathered guild members and individual characters, and they were not thrilled about it. The guy realized that the quest was not meant for him personally, although he thought the opposite. He couldn't do anything about it, but he could strike first and win in order to cope faster than others. History said that this was a very ancient memory that no one could remember, and no one understood where it all began. The memories of this land were filled with fear. They were in chaos, and in this world there was only destruction. Despite the alarming signs, Ryan was in the Adventurers Guild and tried on his prizes. His new accessories went well with his boots, which allowed him to double jump when moving. The guild owner laughed at the boy's appearance and admitted that he looked ridiculous. The boy asked if there was any other equipment available. The man replied that there was none, but the boy did not lose his composure and instead asked to be told about the disaster. The interlocutor agreed and said that an epidemic disaster was taking place in the rotten forest, pointing to the map with his pen. He explained that the rotten forest was inhabited by rotten creatures, but they were not so weak that staying there was dangerous. The young man remembered the difficulties he had with the poisonous skunk and realized that with the epidemic, he would have even bigger problems. The man was impressed by Ryan's exploits and handed him a box with his reward, saying he couldn't believe he had received it. He presented the boy with a hero's medallion, a gift from the Adventurers Guild for his incredible deeds. It was a rare medallion that increased the reputation of the wearer and owner by 500 points, and it was very beautifully decorated. Smiling through his metal mask, he sincerely thanked his interlocutor, giving him a thumbs up. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the forest. The men with weapons were attacked by something unknown, a purple slime that fell on their faces. It was something very poisonous and dangerous. The healer could not find an antidote when the unfortunate man begged for help. Our masked protagonist observed this, and for him, this turn of events was logical and obvious. A disgusting and terrifying monster rose before the audience from the same poisonous slime. It had ugly teeth and a wide mouth. This evil creature was heading towards Photon and intended to destroy him, and Ryan had to stop it as soon as possible to complete the quest. The boy immediately rushed to attack this hideous creature, beating it and trampling it with his feet. The monster's poison affected our hero's body and caused pain, but thanks to the Crown of Purification, he was able to weaken this damaging effect. This was good news for the boy because he was scared and found it difficult to imagine what would have happened if he hadn't had the Crown of Purification. The system reported that the epidemic disaster was reliving old memories, similar to a battle with an old enemy. Suddenly, because of the guy's positive activity, the poisonous misfortune decided to attack our main character. The main character unexpectedly felt something foreign, and the system clarified that the Earth was under the effect of the epidemic, as were all living creatures around it. The monster was not joking and filled the entire clearing with its body and poison. The boy realized that he had to act more cunningly and deliberately, so he headed for the lake because he had a more reliable plan of action. As he tried to run faster, the monster caught up with him with its tentacles. The plan was unreliable, but he had to try. Above the boy's head and the monster's tentacles, a shining blue ball appeared, which then began to multiply and attack. Ryan's crazy plan worked because the spirit of the lake, which faithfully guarded the lake, reappeared to counteract the monster's harmful influence. The mermaid formed real weapons out of water and lightning because magical water spheres formed in her hands. She was very annoyed by the appearance and actions of the terrible monster, and her water spheres were poisonous to the creature. The boy really worked, and to be on the safe side, he drank a healing drink from a bottle, which made him feel better. The young man began to study the hideous body of misfortune and realized that its weak point was its entire body, but physical attacks were useless and even dangerous. Elemental attacks could work, but fire attacks require a lot of mana, and the power of purification would also be useless. But the young man came up with something. A brilliant idea came to the young man that this misfortune was a disease in its purest form, and the solution slowly came to his mind. That is, if it was physically impossible to overcome the disaster and destroy it, the boy decided to cure it, to go against the nature of misfortune. Since the boy possessed a healing blow, he immediately struck the monster's weak body with his fist. The place where the monster was struck began to emit white steam or smoke, and its eyes, which had been red, instantly lost their shine and fervor. Deciding to finish off the creature, he delivered even more blows, turning the misfortune into a sieve. The more healing blows Ryan delivered, the smaller the disaster became. The boy's condition worsened sharply due to the effect of the disease caused by the disaster, which had random strength and frequency. He could barely stand on his feet and remain conscious, but with his last ounce of strength, he directed the power of purification at the creature. When the monster muttered negatively in response to the boy, Ryan still tried to press it to a lethal end. Our main character would not have been a hero if he had not had such a thirst for victory. With his last ounce of strength, he defeated the misfortune. Around the battle, nature began to emerge from its deadly slumber, with blue water being the first to come alive. The system congratulated him on completing the quest for the fragments of misfortune, and his reputation grew by 30,000 points. The boy also received a gift of a ring of misfortune, which held the power of misfortune recorded in legends, as well as a letter with a yellow bow. Ryan opened the letter and saw text in an unfamiliar language. The auto-translator did not work, and he had to find a way to translate it. Meanwhile, a little further away, two men were worried that a monster might come to them, which usually appeared after a complete defeat. The younger players looked very angry. One of them stared at the screen and complained that someone had managed to complete the quest. The others didn't even believe it. Ryan was walking behind them and listening, while the guys could only guess what reward the quest winner had received. While the boy was happy that the players didn't know that he had actually completed the quest, he saw a man whom he remembered from somewhere. In front of him stood a frightened man in a headdress who was pointing his finger at Ryan in fear, and a guard with a weapon was looking right at him. The guard looked a little strange as he narrowed his eyes at the guy and asked if he had defeated the monster. His plans were bad. He asked for the clues to misfortune in order to get a bigger reward if he wanted to join the guild. He immediately chose not to give them away, but players who were not averse to enjoying what did not belong to them rushed up to him. While the scoundrels were offering our main character lucrative deals one after another, Ryan became seriously annoyed and asked everyone to be quiet. When the scoundrels realized that they would not get what they wanted so easily, they began to threaten him to give them up peacefully, but the guy was not going to give them up. Suddenly, an unknown person behind him drew a sword from its sheath, which emitted blue sparks, and her armor was yellow. This movement of the sword caused a powerful bolt of lightning to strike from the sky between the clouds, hitting all the scoundrels around Ryan. While the bullies lay on the floor and were still being struck by blue lightning, the same person stood over them and asked how they dared to behave this way. The boy was very curious to know who had saved him in this way, and when he turned around, he could not hide his surprise. Standing before him was his sister Rachel, a neuro sword maiden of the 836th morning and leader of the top 100 guilds. When the boy addressed the girl as Minyun, she became somewhat angry and asked him not to call her by her real name in the game. She asked him if he had gotten himself into trouble again and what he would do without her, but Ryan replied that he could have managed without her. The girl looked at her brother with care and love and asked in a joking tone how he would have done it. Surely he would have fought them. She immediately asked if her brother wanted to join her guild, but he replied that he wanted to play alone. The girl called her brother stubborn and reminded him that he was not allowed to join other guilds and asked if he understood. He agreed, but immediately asked for help deciphering the elemental god of war and another ancient language. Rachel couldn't believe her ears. Finally, her stubborn and capricious brother was asking her personally for help. The sister agreed to help with the ancient language with the help of archaeologists Temu and Photon. She then asked him to share his progress on the quest, and the boy asked if she wanted to see what he was doing. The girl explained that she had misspoken, and quickly saying goodbye, rushed to her flight and promised to meet at home. Our main character had just managed to reach the 100th level and became an elemental warrior of the clan. The boy's body began to be enveloped in blue, piercing lightning bolts. It didn't hurt him, but he screamed from the sensations. His precious gloves became warrior gloves that helped the user control the powers of the attributes. He said that although nothing was clear yet, he was quite satisfied with the upgrade itself. Overjoyed, the boy decided to go to another city and set off in a carriage. He couldn't believe that the journey in the game was so long and was frankly bored. He voiced his desire for dangerous robbers to appear near him and yawned lazily. Hearing strange movements and voices, he looked out the window at the coachman and asked what was going on. In front of them were strong bandits. It was an unexpected quest, and the boy had to protect the carriage and the coachman at all costs. Realizing what he had to do now, and immediately the boy was even surprised at how quickly the desired characters appeared. The presence of the negative characters made the horses pulling the carriage nervous, and they began to jump in place. There were about 5 of them, and they surrounded the carriage, pointing their sharp swords at it. The coachman was seized with panic. One of the bandits had a bald head, and he asked with a sly smile how many years and how many winters had passed, and the others joined in his laughter. It turned out that these scoundrels did not yet know which character they had just attacked, but when they saw Ryan, they stopped laughing. The bandits were, of course, surprised by his appearance, but no less surprising was the fact that he had revealed himself. The young man jokingly told them that he had become bored during the journey and wanted to try out a new skill. The young man spread his arms and used the berserk effect, which protected his body like a second skin. He moved so quickly and swiftly that only his gratitude remained, and he disappeared. The poor guys already regretted their foolish act because the guy's quick movements scared them out of their wits. Unfortunately, there was no time to think, because the young man, with a fiery smile, did nothing to the confused bandits. These two probably didn't have enough logic, because while they were worried about themselves, the guy rushed towards the boss. Waiting for him was the boss, Zorky, a burly man with well-developed muscles and a yellow bandage on his forehead. He also had long gray hair. The guy didn't hesitate for a moment and flew at the terrifying man with a loaded fist. He stared at him and called him a brat, promising to send him to hell with a single blow. He grabbed his huge sword and made a double swing, causing his hair and cloak to fly in the air. The blow was so powerful that the boy realized he would not be able to respond to it. The sword passed under the boy's feet because he jumped up, and the boss's swing was of tremendous force. The amplitude of the swing was evident from the fact that the trees, bushes, and rocks behind the boy were split in half. After that, Ryan was able to land on the ground, helping himself stay on his feet with his hand on the ground. Rubbing his arm and exhaling for relief, the boy realized that his arm would have been badly injured if he had blocked the boss's blow. Meanwhile, the enraged boss Zorky stood and looked at his opponent with a crazy look in his eyes, advising him to assess the strength of his opponents. As always, our main character turned threatening advice into jokes and asked if he really had time for chatter. The boss did not calm his rage and, grabbing the hilt of his sword, threatened to cut the guy into pieces. The sword created a powerful blue shockwave, and the boss shouted a spell of superpower and a double swing, adding force to the blow. The young man skillfully moved under the shockwave because he knew that at a high attack distance, he should dodge to the ground. Taking away the big guy's chance to hurt himself, he decided he couldn't let him do a combo. It turns out that our main character acted absolutely correctly because fear was visible on the aggressive man's face. Meanwhile, Ryan saw the man's weak spot on his bare chest, and surprisingly, it was his heart. Without wasting any time, our main character immediately delivered a fatal blow to the boss's weak spot with his powerful arm. Beads of sweat ran down the man's face, and he began to stagger and could barely utter a word. Of course, the man was still conscious, but Ryan decided to add pain, as he said, with a sweet aftertaste. Using the Berserker's auxiliary power again, he delivered a powerful uppercut to the confused man. The pain in Zorky's chin was like fireworks, and his eyes were filled with darkness and nothingness from the sensation. The blow was quite powerful because with this technique, the young man managed to lift the heavy and large man high above the ground. Amid the frightened cries of his subordinates, the man flew weakly and indifferently in an unknown direction. As if on cue, he landed at the feet of the frightened men, who stared in disbelief as he fell onto his back. Meanwhile, our main character clenched his fist and rejoiced at having just struck such a strong opponent. He was not tired at all and decided to immediately find a new opponent and asked who wanted to be next. Realizing that it was useless to deal with such a strong fighter, the robbers immediately decided to turn tail and disappear from the young man's sight. Smiling, he opened the screen, and the system congratulated him on completing the task and defeating the bandits. The carriage and coachman were safe. Later, our hero's eyes saw the ancient city of Sonkan, which now attracted many archaeologists and treasure hunters. A great ancient relic had been found in this place, and in general, it was easy to get rich in this city thanks to the permission for individual excavations. On one of the streets of the big city, a woman with skin similar in color to an orc was walking, and a young man was trying to help her find a store. Our main character was also there and asked a young boy with blonde hair to help him with a question about the area. The child willingly agreed and said that the guy could ask anything because he knew everything in the city better than anyone else. Ryan had come to this city for a reason and immediately asked the boy about an archaeologist named Tima who could help decipher the text. Hearing his guest's request, the boy folded his hands and began to think hard about the person our main character was asking about. After thinking about the question for a while, the guy said uncertainly that he had heard of such a person somewhere. Pointing and hinting at the money, he smiled slyly and said that his memory was failing him, which shocked the young man a little. Realizing that he would not get the information he needed any other way, Ryan took a few gold coins out of his pocket. Again hinting at the money, the child said uncertainly that Tama lived on the outskirts of the city and was difficult to find, even if you explained the way. The boy took out a few more coins and paid the child to take him to the archaeologist. They walked through the green forest for some time, but Ryan did not trust the boy very much because he thought that the archaeologist lived near the ruins. Our main character muttered discontentedly, thinking he had been deceived, but the little blonde boy said they had already arrived. When our main character looked up, he saw a very beautiful little house on an incredibly large and tall tree. While Ryan looked in amazement at where the archaeologist lived, his guide began to call out the name of the house's occupant. The boy suggested that instead of shouting in vain, he should just climb up the tree and talk. The boy explained that this was impossible because the ladder only descended from the top of the house, and it was not so easy to get there. The guide did not quite understand who he was dealing with and looked shocked when Ryan jumped up and grabbed him by the collar. To get to his destination better and faster, the boy jumped off each tree and climbed higher each time. In a few seconds, they were already in the tree above the archaeologist's house, and it turned out that a ladder was not necessary to climb up. Our main character accidentally scared the poor child, who couldn't come to his senses, to the point of cardiac arrest. Suddenly, the door of the brick house opened, and the irritated voice of its owner rang out. The archaeologist's voice immediately calmed the child's fear, and the boy cheerfully greeted Tema. A strange old man with big ears and short stature came out to them. He was a whopping level 158. The boy explained to the little old man that Ryan was looking for him, and that was why they were here. The boy greeted him politely. The archaeologist didn't quite understand what was going on and asked why our main character was looking for him. Ryan carefully showed him a letter with incomprehensible text and asked the old man to read it first. When the dignified man took the letter from the boy, he began to read its contents carefully and muttered under his breath. Without explaining what might be in it, the man was so frightened that he could hardly utter a word. Something had frightened him greatly. Now the interest in finding out what was written in this unknown letter intensified, and the boys stood with their mouths open and asked what was there. The old man had a problem with his sense of humor because he was simply upset by the terrible handwriting of the person who wrote the text. Reading this message gave the archaeologist a headache, and the boys were surprised by his reaction. Strange as it may seem, the old archaeologist immediately recognized the handwriting as that of his guest Rachel's sister. The young man explained that his sister had helped him to ask for the deciphering of an ancient language. Later, the owner of the strange little house invited the boys in and sat them down at a small table surrounded by many books and candles burning on the table. Meanwhile, the archaeologist immediately began to study the letter and said that it told the story of a catastrophe. When our main character heard that it was about a catastrophe, he asked the old man about it in surprise. The man explained that the catastrophe was the cause of the fall of an ancient empire and that the demonic king was to blame. The archaeologist then added that 10 heroes had stopped this terrible demonic king. Hearing this, the young man realized that the quest might be related to these heroes. This made him think, because he was bothered by the fact that this quest seemed to be hidden from everyone. The story from the document sounded terrible and unpredictable, but the archaeologist said there was more. Before its disappearance, the catastrophe had sown its seeds all over the world, and soon they would sprout and feed on the energy of creatures. The archaeologist cried out in alarm that the followers of the catastrophe were aiming for just such a scenario and had to be stopped immediately. The rule of the chronic quest was to search for clues about the followers of the catastrophe, while Ryan asked who they were. The old man explained that they were the ones who were destroying archaeologists and their work in order to reawaken the terrible catastrophe. The young man immediately became gloomy because he understood that if they were stealing archaeologists, they themselves did not know how to awaken the catastrophe. It was like the beginning of the end of the world. Realizing how many items and how much experience he would gain, the boy slapped his knees and shouted that he had to save the world immediately. The archaeologist picked up on his enthusiasm and said that he had recently found a way to infiltrate their base. Now Ryan had a sub-quest to earn Temu's trust, for which he had to collect 100 evil stones. The boy expressed his indignation because he hated menial work, but the archaeologist still said that he had to look for zombies in the stinking forest. Our main character agreed and asked the boy to guide him, but the boy was very scared and refused. The child begged him to refuse and even gave him something that would help Ryan survive, repeating once again that he did not want to go there. So, this forest, which was called Stinky, was a place equivalent to a swamp. Here, you could raise your level nicely, but the smell got in the way. In the terrible, dark, smelly green swamp, rotten and scary zombies floated, gurgling and growling. Our main character came alone, despite the incredible stench, irritably covering his nose with his hand. He held in his hand an edible minty slime that he had received from a child in exchange for a trip to the forest. Trying to believe that this stuff would help him, the guy took it and ate it. In his hands, he rubbed deoxygenating mint, which had green leaves and beneficial properties. He rubbed the juice of this mint under his nose and realized that it made him feel much better. A dirty black rotten foot in torn pants and nasty green slime stepped on the ground where there was no grass. A crowd of stinking zombies of the 113th level was heading towards our main character. The guy immediately began to try to physically destroy these stinking monsters with his fist. Since these creatures were rotten and old, his fist entered the zombie's head as if it were a rotten stump. As a result, all the remains of rotten skin and muscles flew like mud onto our Ryan's clothes, face, and hair. Leaving the fight, he began to irritably wipe the stinking contents of the zombie from his clothes and face. The smell was simply unbearable, but since he had come, he had to deal with it. Ahead of him stood a group of dozens of zombies, and the guy was already rushing to break through the crowd. The guy had already rushed into a pile of rotten creatures, and his blows made them wince, but they still reached out to him. With his signature move, he easily knocked the creatures' heads off, sending them flying like soccer balls. Then, adding fuel to the fire, he swept through the zombies' faces with a single punch, hitting 3 at once. The system did not send a message about the level increase, but the guy had already finished the fight and killed at least 100 zombies. Suddenly, among the stinking bodies of zombies, he saw a slightly glowing black stone that looked like a piece of coal. This was the very stone of evil that the archaeologist had spoken of, but they were difficult to collect because few of them fell out of the fallen zombies. The guy picked it up irritably and, looking at his find, muttered that he would get tired quickly. A brilliant idea came to him, and he looked at the stone in his hand with slight shock. A new batch of rotten zombies was already heading towards him, walking towards him as if spellbound. This zombie resembled a rotten stump, and his hand easily dealt with the decaying creature. Another stinking creature suffered the same fate as the previous one, bowing its head in defeat and falling down. Another dark stone of evil fell to the floor, the 14th in a row. The second zombie had a dark aura, and it was in them that the necessary dark stones of evil were found, the boy realized. The system told him that he had acquired the hidden skill of magical scanning, and the boy decided to try it out immediately. When he activated this skill, his eyes lit up orange, and to his delight, he realized that it worked. From a large pile of zombies, he could now see which one had the dark stone of evil he needed. He rushed back into the fight, but this time his enthusiasm was much greater, as this skill made searching more interesting. Now he was not interested in other zombies, and it was mutual, as they did not even pay attention to him while he was running. Now the number of dark stones of evil collected reached 31, and the boy received an achievement called Fun to Collect. Suddenly, the boy saw mountains in front of him, at the top of which something unknown, similar to a volcanic crater, was burning. The boy left the stinking zombies and even one of them that had a stone of evil because he was disturbed by what he had just seen. He decided to find out what exactly he had seen and said that the magic scan was now activated. The trees around him showed their scary faces, which he had never seen before. When the young man saw the terrifying faces on the dead and dry trees, he asked how they could have ended up there. Then one of the trees opened the entrance to the dungeon, which was the source of the diseases. The young man had already studied detailed information about it. This dungeon had been hidden from the young man, and he hoped to receive rewards and bonuses as its discoverer, so he boldly went inside. The system confirmed with a message that Ryan was the first player to discover the dungeon, and he walked down the stairs in the terrifying darkness. When he entered a brighter and more decorated room, he discovered that the dungeon was more than it seemed at first glance. As it turned out, the dungeon had its own inhabitants. He saw creatures standing in front of him that were already decomposing from disease. It was unexpected for our main character to see them, just as it was unexpected for these creatures, who immediately rushed to attack with their weapons. They almost wounded the uninvited guest with their tridents, which gave the young man a terrible shock. He did a somersault on the spot and dodged the weapons. When he landed, he punched the ground with his fist, causing cracks in the floor. The creatures did not expect such actions, and what looked like a shark shouted to its friends to be careful. Now our main character inflicted pain by delivering a heart attack to the hammerhead shark, although the creature stubbornly tried to defend itself. Its attempts to save itself were futile because Ryan immediately knocked it out and sent it into the wall. Then, dodging the sharp trident, he delivered an uppercut to the creature, which now looked more like some kind of alien. The creature leaned on its trident from the blow and hung its tentacles. It was in pain and struggling. Another shark, which had already recovered, ran and screamed frantically, exposing its hands and teeth. Having gained enough speed, it rammed our main character, causing the boy to lose his composure for a moment. The creature, which resembled an alien, grabbed the trident and shouted the spell of the spear of the King of the Seas, causing everything around to shine. The trident began to take on other forms, and strange sparks flew from it. The creature wanted to finish it off. While the shark tried to crush the strong boy, the same sparks from his friend's trident began to hit him, and the creature lost its strength. The octopus could not calm down and continued to shoot magical sparks in its trident, which had taken on the color of heated iron. Now the creature was aggressive and determined and wanted to deliver a fatal blow to end it all. To his horror, our main character realized that the octopus wanted to sacrifice his friend to end the fight. When the trident was already aimed at Ryan, he was frightened, but only the shark-like monster was injured. Instead of sparks, the shark's body was pierced by the iron and dangerous trident, whose prongs appeared in the creature's chest. Seeing that the boy was unharmed, the octopus screamed angrily that the spear had not worked. Meanwhile, the main character was happy that the skin had worked and saved his body from inevitable fatal injuries. Deciding to take revenge for such a daring act, the boy frantically struck the octopus, causing it to fly into the wall and leave a dent. Having finished with the raging monster, the boy approached the shark that had been pierced by the spear and thought about something. He touched its neck, which showed traces of teeth, and thought it might be a zombie. Thanks to the crown of purification, he was unable to contract the plague from the shark, and now he was walking down a long corridor in search of a fragment of misfortune. Seeing a dark door at the end of the corridor with no light behind it, he realized that this was the room where the boss was. The guy was right because on the pedestal stood a creature resembling Neptune holding a giant trident. The man asked why the boy was torturing them. The system showed that he was the creator of the decaying creatures and had a level of 150. The boy was outraged that the man said he was torturing them and realized that the monsters had said something similar and did not like people. The calm tone of the creature changed to a cry full of pain and despair. He shouted that he would pay with his life for limiting his pain. The man shouted the spell of the sea god's spear and launched a blue lightning bolt at our main character. The boy did another sol, and having escaped the stream of energy, agreed that the boss would be stronger than the previous creatures he had encountered. The Neptune-like man repeated the spell again, and the boy barely managed to escape the stream of lightning and fire. He tried to stay on his feet and realized with regret that the creature would not even give him a moment's rest. The creature raged frantically, and with a loud cry wished death upon the boy. and blamed him for his illnesses and pain. The boy again dodged the trident's blow by simply running past the man, leaving him behind. In fact, this seemingly simple move greatly surprised the man, because the young man was actually able to dodge the spear. When the man said that the boy could have counterattacked, Ryan said that this was exactly what he had come for. Gathering all his mana in his hands, he decided to try out his new special trick on the man. The man, the Sea King, reacted aggressively, irritated by such an attitude towards him. He immediately decided to avenge his honor and grabbed his trident again to attack the young man. The boy was able to jump away from the powerful shockwave of the Sea King's trident and found himself a little further away. This allowed him to regroup for a few seconds, jump back, and direct his mana-charged fist toward the king. The boy did not even look for the creature's weak spots. He immediately flew in and punched the man in the stomach. The Sea King held onto his spear, trembling and coughing, clutching his bruised stomach because it hurt. Suddenly, all the festering wounds, bruises, and pain in his body disappeared, and he was enveloped in a gentle purple aura that healed the creature with its presence. These sensations and the aura alarmed the man a little, so he aggressively asked what the boy was up to and what he had done to his body. The boy did not explain anything, but only clenched his fists again and told the king to continue to expose himself to the blow. Not noticing that his wounds were healing, the king grabbed his spear and tried to attack the young man again. Striking the ground and raising dust, he did not notice that the young man had instantly jumped onto his shoulders and was standing on them with his feet. When they looked into each other's eyes, Ryan said it was time and jumped off the king. The boy jumped up, did a somersault over the man, and begged him to wait a little longer. He hit the king in the head, shouting a spell of elemental attack and healing blow. Jumping high again, the boy shouted to the queen below that he wasn't done yet. From the relentless blows that did not stop, the king of the seas slowly began to sink into the ground beneath his feet. The final combo was a blow to the same spot, and by that time the man was already waist-deep in the ground. As a result, the king of the seas stood in the ground up to his chest and, bowing his head, said nothing in response to the boy who had beaten him. The poor man's eyes could not focus on a specific point, and he moaned weakly. Our main character looked happy and smiled and asked the beaten man how he was feeling now. The man immediately raised his head and, staring wide-eyed, asked how the boy could ask him such a question after such blows. The young man came closer and explained that he had used elemental healing and embodied the man with his power, and the power of the crown had absorbed the power of the disease. Other creatures quietly peered out from behind other walls and listened to the conversation between the king of the seas and our main character. The ones to blame for the creatures being locked up were the followers of the catastrophe, and these creatures were definitely not enemies of the boy. The boy told the king that there had been a misunderstanding and that he had come to them not to fight but to help them. The king, his forehead red from the fight, put his hand on his chest and confirmed that they had misunderstood each other and apologized. He realized that it had become easier to tense the muscles in his arms and understood that the poison was leaving his body, and he thanked him again. Then he looked at our main character and, somewhat uncertainly, asked him to heal the people around him. The guy was really friendly, and at the king's request he smiled and agreed to help. The creatures, who had already approached more boldly upon hearing this, rejoiced that they had finally waited for treatment. As funny as it may seem, the creatures did not know how their king had been healed, so the young man already clenched his fist. For several minutes the creatures moaned and screamed, and one of them also felt relief despite the pain from the blows. After finishing healing the unfortunate creatures, the boy asked the king how they had ended up in such a state. The king explained that they had been deceived and captured by humans, and when they realized that they were on land and too weak to fight, it was too late. The man swore that if they had all been in the sea, they would have been able to fight, but they had been injected with some kind of evil energy and left to fend for themselves. The boy realized that the stinking zombies came from here, but it was unclear why they would steal creatures and then turn them into zombies. A terrible thought immediately filled his mind, and the boy asked hopefully if it had been done for the dark stones of evil. The king replied only that the thieves would return in 2 days and asked him to take them to the sea immediately. It was a quest, and the boy had to help the Sea King Akiri and his people heal and return to the sea. The boy told the king and his people that there was a river nearby that led to the sea, and that it would be faster to get there by water. The boy carefully asked them if they could move in fresh water, but the king patiently agreed to this. Hearing the man's consent, our main character waved his hand and asked everyone present to follow him. The boy led the king of the seas, who was at the head of a crowd of his subordinates, through a dark tunnel without additional lighting. Finally, the boy managed to lead the sea creatures out of the dark, narrow tunnel and pointed out that the Kesha River was in front of them. The poor creatures began to tremble and cry when they saw the water they had been longing for, which they had not seen for many days. Finally, when they realized that they were near the river, their sadness turned into wild joy and happiness from the understanding that they had been saved. Amidst cries of joy, All the creatures began to jump into the water and rejoice that they had finally been saved by a caring person. Only the king of the seas remained on the shore, shaking both of the boys' hands on behalf of all sea creatures and thanking him for his kindness. Now the Sea King Akira, who was overflowing with joy for his people, could reunite with his native element of water. The boy watched as the man jumped into the water from a running start and how his level rose every second. Ryan waited patiently for his reward for such a merciful deed, but nothing happened, and he thought something was wrong. The boy was shocked and horrified when a large column of water appeared behind him, shimmering with magical lightning. The king revealed his identity, instantly rising from level 150 to 350. Our main character, with dirty cheeks and neck, looked at this and could not believe his eyes that the king had been able to achieve such a development.